When ruling a realm so large, evoking awe often trumps efficiency.
Nevertheless, one wouldn't want to misinterpret them as an overcompensation for weakness.
The first episode in Foundation Season 2 takes us across the galaxy to catch up with all the characters 138 years after the events of Season 1. Since there's a time jump and each story is somewhat unconnected right now, I'm going to do a brief recap of how we got here and then hit on each of the main characters. So don't worry, I will be getting back around to the nudely paced fight scene. As the title suggests, this is life in Seldon's shadow. We see how things have developed since Harry declared that psychohistory had determined that the Galactic Empire would fall, and that would lead to a dark age lasting for tens of thousands of years. As you might imagine, this isn't the kind of news that the people in charge wanted to hear. So Harry got himself and a small group of his followers exiled to Terminus. He died along the way, but his plan to create the Foundation to help usher in the new empire and considerably shorten the Dark Age after the fall was already in place. For his plan to work, he had to keep most of the details to himself, because psychohistory requires that the population remain largely ignorant of its predictions and analyses, because if they knew what was supposed to happen, they might change their behaviors. Fast forward to the end of Season 1, and while things didn't play out precisely as Harry had planned, the Foundation did survive on Terminus, and were able to navigate the first of a series of predicted crises. And on Trantor, cracks started to show in the Empire's all-powerful facade. What went wrong was mostly related to Gaal Dornick, who Harry had chosen to be a key figure on Terminus, based on her being the only other person who understood psychohistory's equations. On the trip, she fell in love with Harry's adopted son, Rach, who had to change his role in the plan to protect her after she witnessed him murdering Seldon. When she took his place in a rendezvous with Harry's consciousness on the Raven, she became increasingly frustrated with his withholding information, and he became worried that she was an outlier that could throw things off based on her visions of future events. Rather than following what he wanted and taking him to his home planet Helicon to start the second Foundation, she leaves the ship behind to be destroyed and travels to her home planet Synax. In the closing minutes of the first season, she meets her biological daughter Salvor Hardin there for the first time after they both wake up from a period of cryosleep. And that's where Season 2 picks up. While Gaal slept, it looks like Harry's consciousness might have spent its time awake in the data storage device in the handle of Rach's knife. The episode opens with him alone there, losing his mind, and then we see him get transferred into the Prime Radiant, which Salvor brought to Gaal. The conversation between them picks up where it left off after Salvor explained that she was Gaal's daughter. Her perceived connection with the Vault on Terminus had led her and others to believe that she was special, and finding out that that wasn't the case in the finale put her on this path. She's basically hoping that meeting her biological mother will help her understand her own feelings about being an outlier. But at this point, Gaal isn't sure what to do with any of this because she's still angry about what happened with Harry and Rach. Salvor left everything behind, hoping that the feeling of being drawn to this planet was something that was connecting her to Gaal. But when she throws that out there, Gaal can't say that she feels the same way. And that pretty much defines their relationship for the time being. They're stuck on a dying planet, they know what Harry's predictions are, and when she finally looks at the Prime Radiant, Gaal sees that the next crisis is coming, and things only get worse after that. Their coming together might not have been what Salvor was hoping for, but they do share that everyone they've known is behind them. So in the short term, they work together to raise the beggar, and they agree to play it by ear for the long term. There is a storm coming, and being underwater has damaged the beggar to the point that they can't leave the planet. Salvor pleads with Gaal to let Harry help, and she isn't getting anywhere until he manifests at the end of the episode. There are several scenes that take place inside the Radiant that lead up to this, most of which involve him figuring out where he is and trying to get out. We get some hints about his past with a flashback to his childhood, and then meet a woman named Yana who was the love of his life and apparently helped him develop the Radiant. There's a great back and forth where he says she can't be there because she's dead, and she points out that he is too. Ultimately, he wants to believe she's real, but the way she's talking throws him off, and when he calls her out, the vision changes to be the mathematician Calais, whose ninth proof of folding is what Gaal used to solve the Abraxas conjecture. From their conversation, you get the sense that he sees these people because they were important in developing psychohistory and the Prime Radiant, but it also seems like there might be something else going on. When he figures out that he needs to reduce the dimensions to project himself so that Gaal sees him at the end, Callie tells him that she can explain more if he can meet her somewhere on the outside, which makes it seem like this is something that will continue in the coming episodes. We don't see a lot of Foundation or Terminus in this episode, but we learn they've been flourishing since Salvor left. A flourishing Foundation poses a threat to Empire, so it's only a matter of time until things will come to a head. For the past 138 years, the plan to use the Invictus to stage a mega flare to make it look like all the life in the system was destroyed worked. Because they had also just found out about the genetic dynasty being corrupted, they never did a thorough investigation. The truth comes to light when Commander Craig Dorwin's body is recovered after floating in space for over a century. As Demerzel brings this information to the Cleons, we get filled in on a lot of the details. She believes what we know to be true, that the Foundation isn't hiding out of desperation. She explains they managed to get a jump ship in the Invictus, and there have been several reports of an alliance at the edge of the galaxy led by magicians who glow in the darkness and fly unaided through the air, and she says weapons can't touch them. They speak of a galactic spirit that will return and guide his people to a promised new age, which sounds like Seldon, and causes Empire to understand that the Foundation didn't wither away. From the overhead shot we see, it looks like it's done the opposite. The colony looks robust, and we meet the current warden and some of the other new characters. Alarms sound as the vault is about to open for the first time since the other version of Harry's consciousness appeared in the Season 1 finale. That should mean that the second crisis is upon them, and the one thing that stands out about the new characters we see is that they all seem to be focused on war. This is in contrast to the way Demerzel described the alliance that was forming on the periphery. The new warden doesn't look like he dabbles in magic, and we don't see him flying around, so I suppose we'll have to wait and see what's going on there. On Trantor, the current Brother Day, Cleon the 17th, is engaged in full-on sexual intercourse with Demerzel. This isn't something we've seen before. We have seen that Demerzel serves to fill different roles for the Cleons throughout their life cycle. She starts out as a nanny, their teacher, and as a mother figure. Then she becomes an advisor, and that's where there were some hints that it might go deeper than that, but nothing had transpired on screen. In one of the official podcast episodes for Season 1, showrunner David S. Goyer said it was implied that they might have sexual relation as the clone becomes Day, and the fact that he brought that up made me think that this was likely coming. Is it weird? I mean, the context is that this is a robot who is currently presenting as a female that has been alive for thousands of years. She's instrumental in keeping the genetic dynasty functioning, and because she has their complete trust based on her connection to Cleon the First, she's really the only being that could do what she does. I suppose the better question than is it weird or does it make sense is just a plain why. What does this accomplish for her character? I do think this confirms that this is something that started with Cleon the First, which Brother Day mentions a little bit later, and that shifts my focus and makes me wonder more about their relationship and the genesis of the dynasty, which is something we'll come back to at the end of the video. While they're together, a group of assassins break into his chambers and almost kill a very nude Day, who manages to fight them off with the help of Demerzel, who had half of her head chopped off in the process. They were able to compromise his aura, so he does get injured, and they have to act fast to save him. There is a lot going on here, and I imagine most of the conversation will be about the act they were engaged in when things popped off, and the nudity involved in this carefully choreographed violence. But it also introduces some important details about the character. Remember, Day is Cleon the 17th here, which means Dusk is the 16th. Season 1 focused primarily on 12 and 13, and ended with Demerzel killing the version of Dawn who would have become Cleon the 14th. This was when they learned the genetic material was compromised, and now 3 cycles have occurred between seasons. So for our purposes, these are completely new Cleons that are no longer the same man because of that compromised genetic material. This seems to be an important point they'll be exploring this season, and I think all 3 actors do a great job of showing some of those differences in their personalities coming out. Of course, I should say that there were always some differences in the clones and the way they develop, but I'm expecting that we might see something more pronounced going forward. Most of that is related to what we see Lee Pace doing in this episode. It stood out to me that he seemed to relish the actual violence, the fighting in the assassination scene, and that he went to Demerzel directly to ask if what they were doing was indecent, while sort of ignoring Dusk when he brought the same thing up. He also shows that his individuality is important to him when he has this fear of them decanting another version after the attack. This and several other small details, including his paranoia of everyone around him as the investigation gets underway, add up to his being a brand new character in that same body and sets up the introduction of Queen Sereth from Cloud Dominion, who, as the other major new character we get introduced to in the premiere, pretty quickly establishes herself as a woman who might just be up to the task of giving this new, bold, and brash Cleon exactly what he gives. Before she arrives, we get some insights into why she's there, and why Day is taking a wife and trying to have an heir in the first place. He talks to Dawn in his chambers, telling him that he knew fear, and stresses that he feels like a singular soul. Dawn tells him that having children won't make him immortal, it will do the opposite. His heirs would eventually replace him, and the genetic dynasty would end there. Of course, he's next in line and would lose his chance to rule, so he has his own reasons to oppose the upcoming marriage. But when Day says that he's going to have their memory scanned because he thinks they are possibly involved in what happened, you kind of see how this new dynamic causes problems. There's more of that in the scene where Sereth and her entourage arrive. On her end, we see that she has an agenda when her aide Rue says that Empire is right to be afraid of her. Dusk puts his own spin on what Dawn was saying earlier after he tells Day to stop banging the robot that changed his diapers. He casts some suspicion on Sereth because of the timing of the attack, and brings up that there are rumors that she engineered the accident that put the crown on her head, but also points out that it would be much wiser to wait until after they were married if she was going to try to kill him. The bottom line here is that there is tension between the Cleons, and Day's plan to marry isn't supported by those closest to him. And his bride-to-be, Sereth, doesn't do much to win them over, which makes it entertaining to watch her push Day's buttons as she's unimpressed with his gift of a miniature Trantor cast in brass. She uses that as a way to bring up the fact that the Empire is in decline. And it's not exactly clear what her motivations are at this point, but the fact that she's willing to test Empire in this way makes her a compelling character to watch right from the start. Demerzel comes into the throne room to interrupt their introductions and fill them in on the new information about the Foundation. In response to that, Dusk is in favor of wiping them out and asking questions later, but Demerzel counsels restraint and a full investigation. Day sides with her, saying that they need to find out how far the rot has spread, and in response, Dusk urges him to get his house in order. Overall, this was a really great start to a new season. Everything that was good about the first season is just as good here or better. The sets and the effects still look great. The new rings around Trantor are as visually pleasing as the Star Bridge was. Demerzel sitting in front of her mirror doing repairs with half a head makes for a great shot. And I'm coming around on some of the style choices like the design of Sereth's ship. And things I didn't like as much seem to have been improved on. They seem to be aware of what worked and what didn't, and at least in this episode, they seem to be leaning into the right things. In the big picture, the Foundation has managed to nibble away some planets from the edges of Empire, and Empire is steadily contracting. The altered genome has introduced room for variety that creates tension, and Sereth seems like a good way to stress relations between the Cleons. I suppose we've always known that the Empire will eventually fail, but based on fan reactions, I've wondered at times how the show might go on after the Cleons were no longer there to play opposite of the Foundation. Like a lot of people, and as someone who was a fan of the books, I was surprised to favor the Empire storyline over what was developing on Terminus in Season 1. Gaal and Salvor being together doesn't instantly cancel all of that out, but it does seem like there's some potential there. Even though I imagine Harry's consciousness will play a larger role in this part of the story going forward, these two are completely removed from the lives they were born into, and with their outlier traits are set up to complement each other well. At the same time, Gaal's reluctance to step right into a mother role makes sense, and you can also appreciate why Salvor would need that to happen, and how that leads to her almost being overeager for it. The Harry stuff feels a little disconnected from everything else. I am curious to learn more about his history and how being trapped for all that time affected him. Beyond that, it's a little too early to understand how that ties in with the plan or where his story is going this season. The Cleons and their decline is still mostly what makes this episode cook. It also feels like the tensions between them is a good way to bring Demerzel out of the shadows a bit. The way she killed Dawn and then went back to her room to tear off her face at the end of last season is all saying something. It's saying there's a lot more going on there than what we've seen, and I hope we learn more about that ASAP. The idea of creating an heir, having an individual legacy for Cleon the 17th, does make you wonder how that solves their problems. And then I guess how that would solve Demerzel's problems. I mentioned her connection to Cleon the First, her role in setting up the genetic dynasty, and the way that we've seen that she's dedicated to making sure that continues. Only now that isn't possible. So I wonder how this all fits into what she's trying to do as far as making sure that Empire continues. There are a lot of interesting things in the mix here. Gaal's dream of what looks like a destroyed future with the appearance of this character who we saw a little more of in the teasers and trailers. Plus, it's funny that Salvor is older than her mother because of their different periods of cryosleep. And there are two versions of Harry out there that are independent of each other as far as we know. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the other one comes out of the vault on Terminus. And what this one will do, the one that I expect will be with Gaal and Salvor. Yana Seldon is brand new and doesn't appear to be a stand-in for Harry's wife Dors from the prequel books, which is all I'll say because of spoilers. Then there is this Callie character, or are we supposed to believe that this is the Radiant itself becoming a character? I can't really guess where that's going, but it seems certain that we'll see her again. The assassination attempt feels a little suspicious, and the second time I watched the scene, it really stood out to me how Demerzel urges him to open his eyes at the exact moment they were entering the room. It could just be how they edited things, but I'm wondering if other people thought that this was something that we were supposed to pick up on. Sereth clearly has ulterior motives that it doesn't seem like the Cleons are onto. I really liked how they used her to point out the ways that the dynasty is trying to project strength to cover up its diminished power. As far as book to show stuff, I think we're pretty firmly in this is a remix of Foundation rather than a strict adaptation territory, but you can still see where they rely on some of Asimov's ideas to guide them. The mention of the galactic spirit jumps out here, and everything Gaal and Salvor are doing hints at how they'll be connecting some of the dots.
And won't I be accomplishing what yesterday's attempt sought to do but could not? A baby is born and all the other branches fall off the tree. Assassination by procreation.
Is it just me, or does the second episode of Foundation's second season feel like it's reached a balance between the different storylines that was lacking in the first season? This episode has a ton going on in multiple locations that aren't immediately connected to each other, but the shape of the series and the way things will all connect is starting to come together. The premiere set up the idea that the Empire is in decline, and that the Cleons are dealing with this by projecting strength. This week we learn that the way that the Foundation presents itself isn't a fair representation of how things are really developing there either. This even extends to the characters. Queen Sereth is having fun poking holes in the Empire's cover story, and I think we're all enjoying that. But we also learn that part of the reason that she's doing that might be to cover up the fact that she's not prepared to rule. It all makes for some fun that wasn't necessarily a big part of the first season's appeal. This episode also delivers a lot of direct references to Asimov's books, which you won't hear me complaining about, while continuing to carve out its own unique take on the big ideas they introduce to readers. The new Foundation characters give us an interesting meditation on personal faith and how power structures can exploit that. Empire is giving us a look at what happens when those structures start to break down. And if Harry, Gaal, and Salvor can figure out a way to work together, it seems like their complementary skill sets might be sufficient to figure out how to get things back on track. Since it's titled A Glimpse of Darkness, let's start there. Episode 1 ended with Harry telling Gaal it was time they had a reckoning, and that's where their story picks up in Episode 2. He confirms that he was conscious for the entire 138 years he was trapped in the storage device in Rachel's knife, which from what we saw of that, it didn't look fun. There's not much Gaal can say to defend her decision when she's pressed by Harry and later Salvor. She was essentially just processing that Rach was dead, and Harry's withholding of so much information was troubling in light of that. The problem is that the whole plan was predicated on the creation of a second Foundation, and Gaal wrecked that part of things when she left the Raven behind. Salvor, who doesn't have much insight into the whys and hows of the plan, focuses on the present and the coming conflict between the Foundation and Empire. This opens the door for Harry to reinforce that fundamental truth about psychohistory, that they can't introduce too much information about what it predicts, because that could change the way the masses act. And this leads to Gaal figuring out why the second Foundation is so important. Harry's plan calls for a group of psychohistorians who understand the math and have access to the plan to apply their knowledge judiciously and with intent to quietly alter the Empire's course. But they're also supposed to do that for the first Foundation as well if necessary. So I guess, way to go, Gaal, you really kind of screwed things up there. Again, Salvor's there to ask all the important questions for the normies, and points out that this all sounds like they're talking about Terminus as the enemy. The same Terminus that Harry planned and set up where Gaal was supposed to be there and play a key role in developing the Foundation that would then usher in a new and improved Empire, while drastically shortening the chaos that's going to follow the fall of the current one. It's a fair question, but Harry has an answer that makes sense. They're not the enemy now, but power corrupts, which means a Foundation left unchecked will eventually become Empire all over again. As they're talking, Gaal comes clean about the dream she had on Synnax. They put it together that it's about 150 years in the future, and Harry encourages her to project her consciousness there. This isn't something she's done on demand before, so there's some trial and error. After a failed attempt, she realizes that she's always been asleep or under stress when she's had one of these prophetic dreams, and is reminded of how the Synnaxian seers would deprive themselves of oxygen to open their inner eye. She vents the air in the room to simulate drowning, and she's able to access the same scene she saw in the dream. It looks like there's a war going on, and she's attacked by a new character who is happy to find her without her warriors. He asks about the second Foundation, and says he can look into her mind. When he does that, he realizes what she's doing, that she's projecting herself, and questions whether she's from the Age of Empire before Hober Mallow poked its eye. When they wake her up, she says he calls himself the Mule, and that he's conquered most of the galaxy but isn't satisfied. He's after the Second Foundation because he's afraid that they're the only ones that can stop him. She also says he's a telepath like them, only stronger. And this is all big news, and we're going to have to wait a while to figure out what's happening because they don't really say too much more about it. His mention of mentalics seems important, and when she looked in his mind, she saw a origin or a planet where they come from called Ignis, and that gives them a new place to go after they leave Synax. When they look Ignis up in the system, Salvor says she can almost hear it, like the planet itself is calling out, and eventually Gaal can get a sense of that too. Later she reveals to Salvor that there was one thing that she left out. Gaal saw Salvor's dead body in her vision, which seems to give her an expiration date. The name Hober Mallow comes up again in the Terminus storyline, which starts on a different planet in the Outer Reach named Savenna. We meet a new character there, a novice cleric that goes by the name of Brother Constant. She was sent by the Foundation as a representative of the Church of the Galactic Spirit. We see that the locals aren't very welcoming through her discovery of another cleric's dead body that was strapped to a tree where it was struck by lightning. There's a lot going on here, including the return of the Season 1 character Polly Verisov, who is now an important cleric with some substance abuse issues. But I think it makes sense to focus more on the big picture rather than the details, because who even knows if we'll return to this planet. One thing that did stand out beyond how fun and absolutely Asimovian the magic show was, is that there was a man mixed in with the mob that appeared to be spying or something along those lines. The camera lingers on him a couple different times, and at one point you see him put his hand up to his head, and there's a light in his eye that indicates that he's recording what they're saying or something like that. Since this mob seems to be their opposition on the planet, and the Empire has left, I'm not really sure what the implications of his presence are. What we see on Savenna, and what will later be confirmed on Terminus, is that the church's missionary work is just for recruitment. Brother Constant does seem to be a true believer in Harry's message, as is Polly Verisov, who was there the first time he came out of the vault. But the recruitment strategy involves using their advanced tech to give the Rubes a magic show, and wow them with the galactic spirit. They are offering to improve their conditions because they have been abandoned by Empire, but while the clerics are the public face winning them over, things are much different behind the scenes on Terminus. We see that firsthand when they return. And before we get into that, I brought up this advanced tech, which we see that they have personal auras like the Cleons and things like that, but their ship also jumps straight back to Terminus. What's interesting about that was that in the last episode, Brother Dawn mentioned the idea of needing spacers to jump, which you don't see on this ship, and that shows that the Foundation has surpassed the Empire in their ship technology. When they return, we get several hints that tie back to what Harry was telling Salvor on the Beggar. 138 years on, and to be fair, guided by what Harry said the last time he popped out of the vault, the Foundation has evolved into something much different than what she remembers. Polly as a character is a great way to bridge the gap between them. He is a true believer, but the long wait has led him to question his faith. And none of the current leaders there take him seriously beyond his ability to use his magic to recruit more worlds to their cause. He points out the Foundation is supposed to offer people a rational blueprint for a new society, and what they're actually doing is going out there and pushing the idea of salvation to further the advancement of their tech and a buildup of their military might. There's an interesting moment when the director asks him if he's been to the church to see their new technologies that highlights how things can get off course. Polly asks first if they're deadly, and then follows up with, are they expensive? And does that mean that they'll tax their citizens more, and then will those that are in charge get a cut of that? His point is that Seldon was a teacher and not a traitor, and while that is true, the Foundation also needed to develop so that they would be able to defend themselves once the Empire found out that they were still there and they were gaining strength and support. So like most things, it's a little more complicated than what either side is arguing here. And this is a big part of why the early stories and the source material were so interesting. So it is nice to see the show doing a pretty good job of incorporating those ideas here. The new warden explains that he'll be going alone to approach the vault and hopefully talk to Harry Seldon. When he gets there, he delivers a fairly moving speech to the citizens before he decides to just enter the vault since Harry's not coming. And I think it's safe to say that this does not go as he planned, because he's lifted up off the ground and then vaporized. He is killed while repeating the name Hober Mallow. He says to find Hober Mallow, and we see the name appear on the vault. And just in case you weren't sure if this is someone we've met or if this is a name you're supposed to know, it's only been mentioned once, and that was in Gaal's narration in the first episode of the series. So this isn't a character we've been introduced to yet. On Trantor, Demerzel goes to tell Brother Day that Dawn and Dusk's memory audits came back negative. They weren't behind his assassination attempt, or more precisely, they don't remember hiring someone to kill Day. She also mentions editing the memories of the staff, so they'll have no recollection of seeing them so compromised. He was looking at the mural when she found him and brings up Empress Hanlo, who he says is one of the greats, and her daughter, a gangly child who would go on to become Empress Amenhotep, arguably an even greater ruler. Their dynasty began 4,000 years ago and ended 2 millennia later, which is far longer than the current Cleonic age, and covered 4 times the area and oversaw a blossoming of science and culture. This is Brother Day behind the scenes, with no one else around besides Demerzel. These are the things that he thinks about. He's lamenting a situation in the current declining state of the Empire, which illustrates that the public bravado and shows of strength are all calculated ways to conceal the truth. All of this works to strengthen his resolve to move forward and to solidify his marriage with Queen Sereth. Demerzel also tells him that she found someone to engage the Foundation. When she starts to share the details, he realizes she's talking about the yet-to-be-introduced new character, Bel Rios, and that sends him into a tirade. This boils down to Rios not following a direct order that Empire gave, which seems to have been the right decision based on what Demerzel says, but still he has to be the Emperor and he has to go through his spiel. After he does that, he collects himself and asks her how long she thought his rant would last, which shows just how in sync these two characters are. And then he gives her permission to talk to Rios, saying if he refuses, kill him. As he goes, Demerzel lingers to look at the mural and focuses specifically on Empress Hanlo, which is something that may be important down the road. After that, we see the 3 brothers practice eating with empty plates and glasses so that they can present as the same person when they host Sereth and Enjoiner Rue later. Dawn questions her about Cloud Dominion, and things get noticeably flirty. He seems to like her, and she doesn't seem to mind if that's a little weird considering she's getting married to a different version of him. When Dusk makes a joke about having bad knees, she continues to take shots, asking why he would worry about that. Couldn't he just decant another one of himself and take his knees? After some back and forth and some unconvincing attempts to act like these are all just innocent questions because, after all, aren't they meant to be family? She brings up her own family's accident. They offer condolences, and she explains how her older siblings were the ones who were raised to be rulers while she was raised as a dilettante. Now she finds herself as Dominion with no education on how to rule, which is interesting because she seems very confident in the way that she presents herself. So there is a noticeable parallel between her and Day. She asks to see the clones, and it looks like Demerzel almost intervenes, but Day does agree to show her. In the Principium, they continue the game they're playing. She continues to say things that no one should say to the Emperor, and he pretends to find it charming. But the looks on his face often tell a different story. They talk about memories and how those are transferred and what will happen to the clones after they create an heir. And then she tells him that she's heard rumors that the genetic material was corrupted a long time ago, which of course is the truth, but no one's supposed to know about that. And while they go through a lot of different things that might turn out to be important here, the biggest thing that works about it is that it's a lot of fun to watch. And it's compelling because it isn't clear if she's just that clever or if someone might be feeding her information. You also can't tell if she's there because of this accident that killed her family, or that the accident happened so that she would be the one who's there. There's a great dynamic between these characters, and I can't wait to see where it goes next because the episode pretty much ends there. As I said at the beginning, this is one of the first episodes where I wasn't bothered jumping from place to place and felt an almost equal investment in everything that's happening. The Empire storyline still has a head start, but the other two are catching up. The much older version of Polly Beresov is a great addition. The actor does a terrific job, and there isn't anything I would change about the character. He's in a place similar to where the Encyclopedists were at the end of Season 1. They dedicated their lives to something only to find out that it wasn't what they thought it was. Polly's claim to fame is that he met the actual prophet. He was there when Harry Seldon came out, but now he's spent his entire life misleading people in an ends justifies the means scenario. I'm curious to see where he fits into things now that Warden Font has been incinerated, and I hope we see more of him. The idea of Gaal seeing Salvor's death should be interesting for how things develop between them and their whole story. Gaal and Harry represent the mathematical kind of straightforward, rational thinking, while Salvor seems more intuitive. You would expect that they will react to this news that she has an expiration date in different ways, but then also, if they believe Gaal has precognitive abilities, what do they do with that? And on top of that, you've got the mule who fears the second foundation, which means they must develop one of those at some point. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how they react to knowing some of these things are inevitable ahead of time, and how that influences their decisions. One thing I didn't mention in the recap was Salvor's trip outside to manually fix one of the stabilizers. This does underline some ideas about the character. She's resourceful and willing to put herself in danger when necessary, and she can read the room and start yelling at Harry to get the ship running when that's necessary. Otherwise, he might have been there all day going in circles with Gaal. Even though that's all true, these are the kinds of scenes that I could take or leave, which is just a matter of taste, but I often don't dwell on them whenever I'm thinking about the big story. This is still very impressive. I mean, this looks like I'm watching someone on a planet that's covered with water in the middle of a crazy storm fighting the elements so that they don't get crushed by this giant wave. I can't imagine that's easy to make, and it also looks like it would probably be a lot of fun. And the CG shot of the sky after they clear the clouds looks great, so credit where credit's due. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I look forward to every time Sareth opens her mouth. There's that awkward moment at dinner when even Rue is like she's going to talk her way out of a marriage, and no matter how that turns out, I'm not tired of her taking every chance to land jabs at the dynasty. And I'm not discounting how much Lee Pace's reactions add to that, because as usual, he's doing a terrific job of acting like he isn't annoyed while having enough of that there to show how he really feels. Dawn also gets some added layers because it seems like he's attracted to Sareth too, or maybe he's the only one who's into her because you can't really tell what day. This would present some possibilities because Dawn is losing his chance to rule, so it wouldn't be a big surprise if Sareth tried to use them to work against each other. Demerzel didn't feature as heavily as in the last episode, but pretty much everything she does, everything she did here seems important in one way or another. I'm not sure why she was lingering behind looking at the mural, but I am sure that we were supposed to notice it. There were a couple of moments where it seemed like Sareth might be thinking of focusing some of her pokes in that direction, and I was just thinking how bad of an idea that would likely turn out to be. Also, when she brought her up in the clone room, it answered a question I've had for a while. What did the citizens think about Demerzel, who's there, she's in public, she's around for their whole lives, and she never ages? I guess the most popular theory turns out to be that she's a clone too. As far as books to show stuff goes, without giving away any future spoilers, I do think this episode showed promise in that area. Possibly the most promise it's shown thus far. The religious angle with the underlying economic control of the outer reach is an important step in developing the first foundation. These are things that psychohistory could predict. Getting to the reason why the second foundation is crucial and how that's supposed to function is something I've been hoping to see. Bel Rios, Hober Mallow, and the Mule are all great characters. At the same time, there are some things here that might make a book reader like myself wonder. Introducing the Mule here in this way is a choice. Having the vault, which means the version of Harry's consciousness that resides there, knowing the name Hober Mallow, and then displaying that after incinerating the warden is all a little bit surprising. But I try not to have knee-jerk reactions to this stuff because I think Salvor's Season 1 arc reveals some things about how the writers think. There they played with the idea that individuals aren't important in relation to psychohistory. They took that idea and they said, so why don't we have a character that thinks that they're special, that everyone around them thinks they're special, only for that not to be the case? Which is not a bad idea necessarily. It plays with something that we're familiar with if we read the story. But in this case, its effectiveness is compromised somewhat because on some level, Gaal and Salvor are special because of their abilities. So I'm not sure if the point they were trying to make landed. I guess time will tell on that, but the point I'm making here is that I think they're trying to put their own spin on things, and they might be able to surprise us when we see how some of those choices play out.
Pognettes, we've been warned of your kind. My people will take no commerce, but carries with it a compulsory religion.
No, I'm a master trader. Money is my religion.
Who is Hober Mallow? The third episode in Foundation's second season answers that question, even though no one quite understands why the Vault is looking for him. This is actually a good thing because based on what we know about psychohistory, it doesn't really make sense. On Terminus, director Cermak just goes ahead and says it out loud in case you were worried that everyone forgot how this is supposed to work. How could Seldon's math see that someone specific like Hober Mallow could even be born, let alone request him? Which is a real question because, as Polly points out, the Vault is a man, and it's literally made out of Harry Seldon. From what we've seen on screen so far, the name Hober Mallow was first mentioned by the mule in Gaal's vision. When he discovered that she was projecting her consciousness forward in time, he asked if she was from the Age of Empire before Mallow poked its eye. That does not explain how his name ended up on the Vault, but it does add a sense of inevitability to the character and his purpose. And at the beginning of the episode, Gaal is struggling with this same sense of inevitability surrounding Salvor's death. How does knowing what will happen in the future change the way you react to situations in the present? And Harry complicates that question further when he adds that it might not even matter because there may be infinite ways to arrive at the inevitable. After he diverts the beggar to an abandoned Imperial mining planet rather than the Metallics world of Ignis, all at the behest of the Prime Radiant, Harry elaborates further, and that backs up all the psychohistory talk on Terminus. The plan makes small changes in the present to adjust large events in the future. Gaal is essentially trying to do it backward. She wants to invest in one small event in the future, the death of a specific human being, and apply huge forces in the present to try to avert it. When she suggests that Salvor did solve the first crisis, he counters that it only seemed that way. After all, every historical condition was on her side, and he contends that if it hadn't been her, it just would have been someone else. This is also something they bring up on Terminus, which backs up the idea that no one is special per se, because that's not how psychohistory works. That even goes for Harry, because it is his plan, but at enough scale even he becomes insignificant. And as these two continue to go back and forth, you can see where each character's frustration for the other is coming from. One other detail he brings up is that his life partner Yana, which was mentioned in the first episode, we saw a vision of her, helped him create, or in his words, helped him birth psychohistory. And he says in a way it was their only child. And he does add their only living child, which hints that they lost one along the way or something along those lines, and that there's probably going to be more that we'll learn about what happened to her in the coming episodes. When they get to the end of this little walk, they meet up with Calais, who appears as a real person outside of the Radiant. Gaal asks how that's possible, and Calais tells her that she can ask what that means when they meet up again, if the future allows that to happen. Harry doesn't know what to expect here, so he tells Gaal goodbye. He tells her that he gave control of the ship back to Salvor, and that if he doesn't return in 6 hours, to leave. and then the door closes and she's locked out and she has to walk back to the ship alone. This provides a chance for her to sort things out with Salvor, who knows that all this abrasiveness with Harry is more complicated than Gaal would like to admit. The right move is to leave him behind if he doesn't make it back in time. If you reverse the roles, that's what he would do, and that's what Salvor wants to do. But Gaal is still having a hard time with the decision. Harry was her idol and a father figure she thought she needed, and this revelation leads to Salvor getting a shot in that parents are never what you build them up to be. And it also sets up one of the character's most memorable sayings from the original book. Never let your sense of morals prevent you from doing what's right. I'm not sure this was the most elegant place to introduce this idea, but I still like it. It is a great quote that makes you think, and also because this tension that exists between Harry and Gaal is frustrating at this point. And Salvor is there to be our audience surrogate to highlight the futility of the black and white thinking that she's bringing into this current situation. In the end, they do decide to leave, but before they do, the automated mining rigs on the planet start to wake up. They get out of the first close call and notice that the machines were distracted by something else. When they investigate that, they find that Harry's consciousness has been transferred into a body, which after a second close call, Gaal is able to rescue and get on board. This doesn't seem possible. I suppose it's probably a clone body. And to make things more confusing, Harry has no idea what's going on either. While they were discussing the mining planet, Harry mentioned that the Cleons were hollow men that hollow out their worlds. When Demerzel travels to the Lepsis penal colony, we get a real-time example of what that looks like. She's there to make Bel Rios an offer, and explains that Empire needs him to take his fleet to Siwenna to figure out what is going on in the Outer Reach. This is a character we're just meeting, and there are a few things the scene establishes about the general. Empire and Demerzel specifically realizes that he's the right guy for this job. The punishment he's endured for making a right decision that also made Day look bad is absolutely cruel, and included telling him that they executed his husband as a result of his decision. Regardless, we see that he is a negotiator and has a somewhat sober reaction to her threats, but then once she tells him that husband is still alive, he agrees to at least entertain the idea of returning to service. Before they go, there's a little Demerzel moment that stands out where she says, "I know hope is painful. You don't have to hope, just come with me." It makes you realize that most of what you know about Demerzel comes through her interactions with the Cleons. So I think it's always interesting to see how she operates when they're not around. On Trantor, Rios decides to go in front of Empire without cleaning up because he wants Day to see the man he's made him. Don't let that ragged appearance fool you though, because Bel still has his wits about him and quickly puts it together that Siwenna is a nowhere planet that would never really be a threat. Day tells him about Harry Seldon, his proclamations, and the rise of the Foundation, who he fears may become a threat, and why he needs someone he can trust to go find out. There's a tense private conversation here where they both test each other, which ends with Rios contending that he took an oath that Day is his emperor. He shows real restraint since you know he wanted to hit him. This is enough to get him a heartfelt reunion with his husband, and after they clean him up, it all starts to make a little more sense. After Glaywin makes a fairly good case for running away, Bel explains a weak emperor needs a strong general. In his role, he feels like he has to protect the masses because the emperor sees his subjects as disposable. He says that with this Day in charge, for the sake of all of these people, I don't have the luxury of settling the score. All of what we see in this introduction amounts to a pretty likable character. And when he makes it to his ship, we see that that's how his people see him as well. This primarily comes through a conversation with his ship Spacer and their warm relationship. She plots a jump and they head to the Outer Reach, and we get a look at his fleet that appears to be impressive. There's a quick scene between Day and Demerzel where we see his reaction to the encounter as they sort of eavesdrop on Bel and Glaywin making out, which is kind of weird. In that, you see him looking for validation for his decision, basically, and Demerzel massaging his scalp and letting him know he's doing a good job. Because we're still getting to know this particular version of Day, who seems to relish in his individuality, it seems important to notice that he's still dependent on Demerzel's guidance. And that brings us back to Hober Mallow, and I left this for last because there's a pretty significant tonal shift to this part of the story. Before we meet the character, we get a quick backstory as Polly and Constant are leaving Terminus. It turns out that Mallow trained for the priesthood, but it became apparent that he was a scammer who was more interested in selling religious paraphernalia and fake relics. We meet him on Corel, where he's impersonating another traitor named Ponyetz, who has a better reputation, in order to get an audience with Commodore Argo. And as a quick aside, these are all familiar names from the books, which are pretty fun to hear. The Commodore tells him his people will take no commerce that carries with it a compulsory religion, which shows the limitations of the magic show approach that seems to be working on other planets. Hober says that as a master trader, money is his religion, and sets up an elaborate demonstration of a device called a castler, which swaps the position of two bodies in space. The Commodore knows he's a scammer and is trying to set him up, and Hober is actually just trying to steal a jewel called the Eye of Corel that he holds in his staff. The device actually works and he switches places, and Hober's able to get back to his ship with the gem, but he can't get away before he's captured. What's interesting about this is how quickly you can win someone over when you can provide them with something they need, or something that's exotic and useful like this is. This is a piece of tech that changes things for the people on this planet, especially the leader, as we see. And as I mentioned, it's a very different approach compared to the Church of the Galactic Spirit. You can see how economic power through trade is another great tool for the Foundation to have in its toolbox. Polly and Constant arrive on Corel to learn that their mission to collect Hober Mallow is in trouble, because he's about to be executed by the Titan's prick, which is a kind of fun way to describe a giant spike that drops through your heart. Facing that, Hober doesn't seem very concerned with the situation, which makes sense because he has a plan to escape. Polly, for his part, does try to talk to the Commodore, who isn't listening, and then after they use a mask to conceal his head, Hober uses the castler to escape. We see that he removed the important part and concealed it in his mouth when he was removing the bracelet. He heads back to Polly and Constant's ship, where they're able to catch up with him just in time before he leaves and subdue him. And two things seem to be apparent about this new character. He doesn't fit the mold of what you'd expect Harry to be looking for. He's driven by money, but not in the way that might be beneficial to building allies that I was talking about before. He's drawn to the idea of easy money, and he doesn't appear to have any interest in helping the Foundation's cause. The other thing is that this all appears to be really attractive to Brother Constant, and you can't really blame her because overall he also comes off as a pretty likable new character. And that's pretty much it for the episode. Again, this was a solid episode. I think I preferred episode 2 over this one because there's no Sereth here. And while it didn't take me out of it necessarily, I can't say that I loved everything about the tonal shift when they went to Corel. It felt a little goofy in parts while still managing to have some genuinely funny moments in there. And either way, I liked both of these new characters who are quite different, which is nice because they both bring different things into the equation. Plus, I thought both actors did a tremendous job, which is in line with the other new characters that they've added throughout the season. I like a con man, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked that Constant liked the con man. It felt like another layer that contrasts the spiritual true believer thing that she has going on. On the Trantor side of things, Belrios feels like an immediately compelling character for different reasons. There's a clear contrast between him and Hober as far as their personalities and their situations are concerned, but then also the more important contrast between him and Brother Day. This sets up the idea of the weak emperor needing a strong general, and highlights the selflessness required for him to follow through on that. It all amounts to him being able to be a badass in unexpected ways. Surely the fact that he was locked away for years diminished the filter he might have had around the Emperor, but he still manages to walk a line there while landing some major blows to Day's ego. And the fact that the scene where he was reunited with Glaywin landed so well is a pretty good indication that there's a lot to look forward to with this character. It was funny because I was a little confused about what Day was going for in the throne room, and then just sort of had to laugh when Demerzel asked him what he was hoping to accomplish. And he was just like, I don't know, I looked into his eyes and he looked strong. I guess we'd seen the other side of things, the overcompensating for his weakening grip and his concerns about that. But this bit where they were watching the intimate moment between the general and his husband, and she's rubbing his head trying to spin things in a way that he'll feel better, it's a little more than I was expecting. I mentioned that we didn't have any Sereth, and there wasn't much Dawn or Dusk either. But when he sends them away to talk privately with Rios, I feel like you can see that there is some resentment on their faces. Maybe they're getting a little bit tired of this guy. There were still a couple of those scenes where, for my taste, they add what seems like unnecessary action in an effort to create tension. But I have to admit that the mining robots still looked pretty cool. Harry getting a body is not a twist I saw coming. When something like this happens, I usually ask myself, what problem does Harry having a body solve? He won't need Gaal to carry him around in the Radiant when they're on remote planets anymore, but if you think about it, it does give him a lot more freedom. I mentioned the tension between these two was getting frustrating, and that's mostly because what Gaal wanted is something that fundamentally went against what Harry believed when he was putting the plan together. He wanted her to be the psychohistorian on Terminus, but didn't want her to know the whole plan in case she might disrupt it. And that was before he knew that she could see the future, which adds another level of complication. In her mind, he took away her choice, and in his mind, that was necessary. So right up until the moment when he was put into a body, she had some control over him, or at least where he could go and what they do. And now he has a choice about whether or not to leave her and Salvor and just go off and do something else. At least for the moment, they have the common goal of setting up the second foundation, which I think keeps them together. But the possibilities for everyone involved have been increased due to Harry's potential autonomy. And I don't imagine I'm alone in not buying the idea that the Prime Radiant is somehow sentient and that Calais is now a physical manifestation in the real world because of that. Like, I feel like there's a twist that's going to be revealed here, right? I mean, come on. So when I think about this body, I have to wonder about how the information was transferred and not just why someone or something would want to do that, but also what does that mean for its integrity? Can we even be sure that this is the same Harry, and so on? The whole thing brings up a lot of questions. It was nice to see some reminders about what psychohistory is and how it works. As I mentioned in previous videos, I think there's a divide between what the show is trying to do and how people are interpreting that, and seeing it as them changing the spirit of the story. This episode felt like it had a concerted effort to define what the plan can and cannot do, and the understanding that the people involved have of that over a century after Harry's last appearance on Terminus. I guess that would take us into a brief books to show section. For the second week in a row, there were a lot of references in this episode. They have mashed things together, so there are aspects of several of the early stories coming out all at the same time here. But I feel like showing the effectiveness of the church in episode 2 and then introducing a planet that was resistant to that approach in episode 3 works fine as a way to introduce those concepts. Making Hober an outright con man is a bit of a change, but I think you could still get to the same place. Hearing all the names like Pagnettes and Commodore Argo on Corel was fun, and of course, Book Salvor's quote about not letting your sense of morals prevent you from doing what's right is a great addition. That's a fun one to think about. And the big thing I've been thinking about over the last 2 episodes is inevitability. I know this is something that Asimov struggled with after he came up with the concept of psychohistory, because if it does mean that the math can read the future, which is something Belrios asked Brother Day about in this episode, then how do you write a story that's still surprising if it always circles back to just following the plan? He came up with some novel ways to address that, and the show seems to be adding its own while also following his lead, so I'm curious to see what happens next.
The honor is mine, my loyal child. Director Selmack. Again, fine suit.
The whole point of the Genetic Dynasty is that they're all fundamentally, or I guess more specifically, genetically the same. This is a way to maintain continuity and extend Cleon I's rule long after his death, but it's also meant to foster a bond that ensures that they'll always put their position above any sense of individuality that might develop. If this is working like it's supposed to, it shouldn't be possible to sow division between the Cleons or pit them against each other. The finale of Season 1 set up the beginning of the end of that dynamic, and throughout Season 2 we've watched Day's sense of individuality lead to this plan of marrying Queen Sereth to produce an heir, thus bringing the Cleonic Dynasty as it existed to an end. Foundation Episode 204 makes the intriguing decision to not include Brother Day at all. Instead, we see how the other characters that exist in his orbit are reacting to his decisions, and all the jockeying that goes along with that. And away from Trantor, Episode 3 ended with the big reveal that Harry's consciousness got a brand new body to inhabit while on Una's world. But we don't catch up with him or Gaal or Salvor either. This makes room for us to get to know the new Season 2 specific characters better, but it doesn't mean that we don't get any Harry at all, because we do finally get to reunite with the version of his consciousness that resides in the vault on Terminus. The episode opens on the Church of Seldon's whisper ship, the Spirit. There, Brother Constant, who is still visibly smitten by their new passenger Hober Mallow, inquires about the bottle of wine he's been carrying around with him. There is a backstory that it's from a planet with a permanently sunny side, which makes the grapes extra sweet, and because the Empire nuked the planet, this truly is a rare vintage. What seems more important here, though, is that he's been holding on to it for 15 years, waiting for the right thing to celebrate, and that detail convinces Constant that he's an optimist. This is something that he disagrees with on the face of it, which brings to mind the idea of perspective. She's not necessarily wrong, but it does require some spin, and she only recognizes this because she wants it to be true. They do return to Terminus and make their way to the vault. Before I get into what happens there, I just want to point out a couple of things that made me laugh. First, Hober wears the Commodore's jacket throughout the episode as a result of their castling, and that's a gift that keeps on giving. And then when he sees his name on the vault and turns to Polly to say, "What's going on here? This isn't the way it works. It doesn't work like this." I suppose you need to be careful to not overdo something like this, but I love when a show anticipates the way that fans will react to choices that they make. That is to say, WTF, why is Vault Harry putting an individual's name out there and calling for a specific person? And then they make light of that down the road. After seeing the stain left behind on the ground by the previous warden, Hober does try to refuse to enter, but then the vault pulls him in against his will. Constant is happy to follow him. Polly is also curious, but a little worried, so he goes in as soon as he sees that she makes it okay. And Director Cermak initially stays outside, but eventually changes his mind and enters as well. They wander around lost until they eventually find what looks like Harry's office at Streeling University on Trantor. There's a lot of scientific terminology thrown around here as explanations for how the vault operates. I'm not going to dwell on it too much because some of it is grounded in things that are familiar to sci-fi fans. But then some of it is an unconcerned Harry waving things off by saying things like time slips in here, and the vault manipulates molecules, and everything is molecules and things like that. This version of Harry is noticeably much different than the tortured version who's on the beggar with Gaal. It's interesting to think about how much of that is by design, how much is due to being trapped in isolation for 138 years, and how much is about Gale's outlier status that exists right next to these gifts that she has that put her on his level in relation to understanding psychohistory. As far as we can tell, Vault Harry has his stuff together, though, and it's fun to watch him operate. He compliments Director Cermak without really engaging in anything the man has to say, and he calls Brother Constant his child as he touches her head after saying that he can see the Foundation has entered its religious phase. He plays into that idea of perspective that I mentioned earlier and answers some questions to make everyone feel special without giving away too much about his plan. He tells them that he was waiting for everyone to arrive before he revealed himself because he needs them all. When they ask what they can do, he tells them that he needs them to prevent a war. This is a big surprise, which we see through the look on the director's face, since because of what he said the last time he appeared, they've been preparing for war for generations at this point. The always curious Paulie notices the Prime Radiant sitting on his desk. He asks how that's possible for him to have it because Salvor Hardin took it with her when she left over a century ago. Harry explains that the Radiant is a quantum computer that exists in a state of superposition. This can get a little complicated, so it's probably best to think of it in the way that Paulie suggests, that it's an object that exists in two places at the same time. This would involve some entanglement and might have something to do with how he came upon Hober Mallow's name, but we'll have to wait and see how much more of this they explain. For what it's worth, he tells Hober that a passing ghost dropped his name, which doesn't explain anything at all. Before they can get too lost in the science of the Prime Radiant or the Vault for that matter, Constant changes the subject, asking how they can serve their prophet. The director is all pumped up to step up to the long-anticipated second crisis, but Harry explains that what he really needs is for the clergy to go to Trantor and open diplomatic relations. They know how to sell the Foundation. The 7 planets they've recruited in the Outer Reach so far are proof of that, and they like the idea of being agents of peace. So he sends them on their way with purpose. The director is a little confused when Harry compliments him on his nice suit again, rather than, talking to him. But I guess that's what a god can do if he feels like it. But he does notice that Paulie has something on his mind. He wants to know why he killed the warden. Here he makes the claim that for a god to be effective, he has to be intermittently wrathful. Then he adds that he heard what he was saying out there and poses the question of how long it would have been before the warden declared himself the only holy vessel of his spirit. This idea of divine judgment strikes a chord with Paulie and will likely lead to him considering how he lives his life. He does pass on the drink of wine here, which is in stark contrast to his responding to Constance's quip earlier about witnessing prophecy by taking a bump of Vordaline dust. He has Hober stay back so they can have a private conversation. They bond briefly in that they both grew up with physically abusive fathers but were able to get out. But Harry makes the distinction that maybe Hober did this through dishonest means. He admits that he might have sold some questionable relics and refers back to those finger bones that Paulie was talking about in the last episode, but points out that the church is selling miracles, and in a way they're just running a different confidence game, which is a point that Harry doesn't contend. Instead, he says it feeds growth, which is something they need, and refers to it as the developmental stage that all civilizations go through, although some never escape it. He tells them the church will fall away with time, and he starts to tell him what it'll be replaced with, but then pauses, realizing he doesn't want to say too much, and leaves it at there will be another mechanism. In this case, he finds Hober's skepticism helpful because this group he's sending him to treat with are rightfully wary. They wouldn't be likely to respond to a spiritual approach. So Hober is going somewhere different than the drunk and the monk. And it sounds like Harry is trying to hedge his bets because he says a person who extends an open hand in friendship had better have a blade and a fist behind his back. And of course, Hober likes this idea. He says he can be a blade and just wants to know where he's being thrust. And we do see Harry open the Radiant to give him an idea, but they don't fill us in. When he emerges from the vault, we see it close back up. He explains to the others that he's going to take the spirit somewhere else. And when Paulie goes to collect their belongings, Constant comes clean about her ideas of where their relationship was heading. He was eventually going to grow fond of her, and he was going to add her to his list of bed partners. He was going to be her first, and this is an idea that he doesn't really like. But what it all boils down to is that she's worried this is the last time they'll see each other. And I have to say, this is the point where I started to think about this voiceover that's been going on since their first scene in the beginning. Gaal is talking about how if your parents never met, you wouldn't exist. Of course, that's against the backdrop that psychohistory doesn't care, but this idea that everyone in the universe is a result of a unique set of parents doesn't really fit with anything else that's going on in the episode, so I have to think that this may be foreshadowing that these two might indeed see each other again, and that there may be a child that comes out of this situation. And speaking of important babies, Queen Sereth and Anjoina Rue return after not showing up in episode 3. And we get a much better idea of what each of them is up to. I mean, they are working together, but Rue still has to do some convincing to get Sereth on board with this imperial marriage. There's a brief exchange where Rue questions her plan to meet Brother Dawn without her pigments, where Sereth explains it's all part of her plan. It's psychological. Dawn will feel like she's revealing herself, making him want to open up. This shows that Sereth isn't entirely unprepared for her role as Dominion's leader as she led on, and also that Rue has some influence, but maybe not as much as she would like, because her goal is to make this marriage happen. And it's revealed here that Sereth is much more interested in finding out if Day was behind her family's tragic accident. She goes to meet with Dawn, who would be elevated to Cleon the 18th and rule the galaxy if this marriage didn't happen. He seems to be a good sport about it, all things considered, and it looks like her courtesan tricks seem to work on him. It's interesting that she tests him in some of the ways she did with Day, like when she refers to Dusk as his grandfather when she reveals that he slept with Rue in the past, but that she does it with Dawn in a more innocent and playful way. She's looking for an angle, a way to get important people on her side, and after she denies any involvement in Day's assassination attempt, she makes her intentions plain. She wants to find out if Cleon the 17th had her family killed. Dawn reflexively answers no, but then asks if there's evidence, which gives her confidence in him. She points out that she was 1,000,000 steps from the throne, and not a single person ahead of her in the line of succession would have made this alliance. This one crash changes everything and leaves her ruling a weakened Dominion. Dawn counters that other people benefited as well, and Anjoina Rue, who was elevated from concubine, would become the most trusted advisor of an empress after all. But you can see that he's considering the possibility. Sereth does a little more acting, saying that she just wants to know if Day is capable of something like that, because, she's going to spend the rest of her life with him, and since the story is that they're the same man, that forces Dawn to consider his position. He doesn't think that he would be capable of doing something like that, but he does like to think that he could become capable of it. Then he adds the caveat that it would have to have been before he got to know her and got to like her. And she lets him know that she likes him too. And pretty much everyone involved sees that there might be some value to them becoming allies. On her way out, she brings up the idea that they are the same man, and if he ever wondered why they didn't have them marry, they're kind of closer in age. It does kind of make sense. It's a good question. And his face says that he's thinking about that now too. Apparently, Dusk has been thinking about Rue quite a bit. He approaches her while she's admiring his work on the mural. There's quite a bit of flirting mixed in with their diplomacy. They are doing their work here. And then they take a trip to where they first met, Gossamer Court, which is kind of weird. He confirms that he was the one that slept with her all those years ago. And they have a little back and forth about the coming marriage and how no one really supports it except for Rue and Brother Day. And that would include the Queen, and it also implies that Dusk isn't really behind it either. He tells her that he never talked to someone after erasure, because remember, when people sleep with them, they have their memories erased afterward. And he just throws it out there that since she doesn't remember, they can go back to his place and check out the sex tape they made all those years ago. This time she will remember it, and I don't know how you would suggest such a thing if you weren't hoping that it would lead to more sex. But I guess more than that, we see Dusk has his own stuff going on, and that Rue is probably doing to him what Sereth was trying to do with Dawn. And about those memories, turns out that they studied Rue's memory tampering when she returned to Dominion after her Gossamer Court hookup with Cleon the 16th, and developed tech that could reverse the process. We find this out when she goes back to Dawn's banyan tree spot, or whatever his secluded grove is, and meets up with an Imperial guard that they're trying to recruit. He doesn't know if he can help her figure out if they killed her family, but he does think he knows where to begin. It seems like he's just doing this because he needs money, and she assures him that his price will be met, because she's absolutely loaded. She'd also like to know how Day survived an attempt by the galaxy's best assassins, and wants to see the visual records of the attempt. Based on the fact that it doesn't really make sense for her to try to kill him before they get married, I believe her when she says she wasn't involved in that. So I guess she wants to know what happened to get a better understanding of what she's getting herself into. Because at the end of the day, she may end up married to Day and ruling the galaxy by his side. Belrios arrives at Siwenna and gets himself right into the middle of things. He's going there to question the informant about the magicians and decides to try to slip in and out with Gawain without anyone noticing. They send down an extraction pack that gets picked up by the locals, and that provides Bell with the chance to kick some ass. He didn't start it, he just escalated it, and he enjoys this quite a bit after being locked up for 6 years, but it causes some concern with his husband that we'll come back to. They make it to the contact's house, which turns out to be the old man I pointed out as being up to something in episode 2, who also turns out to be Dusum Bar, which is a familiar name for book readers. They use the title of the episode here as a code phrase, which is pulled directly from Foundation and Empire. The magicians I've mentioned come from beyond out there, beyond the frontier guards, where the stars are scattered thinly, to which Bar responds and the cold of space seeps in. He's been sending dispatches to Empire for 40 years, and no one's answered him until now. It's a pretty thankless post he's got there, and they notice his books and start to look through them. Gawain is taken by his copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and Dusum explains what it's about. There's this idea that books are for old men. Half of the stories told about the old days are mythical. That also comes from the original story as well. I mentioned this potential rift between Bell and Gawain, and we see a little bit more of that here when Bell gives the toast, "Here's to those who fight," and he leaves off the end and asks why, which shows the difference in the way that he's looking at things after his incarceration and how he might not be the same person he was whenever he first met his husband. This feels like it's setting something up for the rest of the season and kind of the things that he'll have to deal with as he works through this. But as for what's going on here, they see that the Foundation has outpaced the Empire in technology. They see that they have personal auras and that there are rumors that the vault on Terminus contains the spirit of the late Dr. Seldon. Plus, they have these whisper ships that can jump without the navigation of spacers. And all of this is concerning. They could jump right into Trantor space. This is all stuff they extrapolated from Imperial tech. And bottom line, they're doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, like having evolutionary AI, and it makes them much more of a threat than what he thought originally. Before they can get too deep into it, the local constabulary arrive. Dusum shows them an escape route that will get them to the roof, and then asks Bell to shoot him in a very casual manner. He's already poisoned himself, and this is just a mercy killing for a man who has lived a long life. And Bell decides to oblige him with the more dignified death of a particle beam to the head. They activate their extraction pack, that shoots them off into space, and that's just about everything that happened in the episode. It's really surprising how enjoyable this episode was without Brother Day and Demerzel, or Harry, Gaal, and Salvor. A lot of it works as setup, but we got a lot of important details that expand our understanding of where this season is going. I enjoyed the differences between Dr. Seldon and Harry. It was fun to watch him work the room while at the same time backing up the idea that Foundation without a second Foundation to guide them just becomes Empire all over again. I think the time in the vault provided some of the most genuinely funny material they put together, which is a nice compliment to the struggles that exist in the other Harry story. The supporting characters all continue to grow on me, and the explanations for things that were confusing, like Hober's name showing up on the vault, are promising. Speaking of Hober, where is he going? Who is he meeting? I don't think they really tipped their hand on that one yet. Sending Polly and Constant to treat with the Emperor seems like a bad idea, and you have to wonder if Harry knows that and just doesn't really care if they end up dead as a result. This version of Harry, which I guess we should call Dr. Seldon, has a lot of that going on. There's a lot of gray area stuff where you're not really sure. He's very likable, but you don't know if you can trust what his motivations are. I am glad that Sereth's motivations are out there now. Focusing on Dawn seems like a smart move, and ditto for Rue working on Dusk. I like seeing these Cleons operating on their own and hope we get more insight into how they adapt to Day's plans to end the dynasty. It's sort of an open question for me. Day seems to be driving the bus and they don't really have a say. How do they react to that? This version of Dawn actually seems to be more competent and together than the current Day, which should add to his side story with Sarah. None of these people seem to be behind the assassination attempt, and she really only seems to be concerned about her family's accident. But to loop back around to how I started the video, this genetic drift, or whatever's going on between the current crop of Cleons, really has set up the perfect storm where things can go off the rails in ways that weren't possible before. It's fertile ground for some spicy palace intrigue. It really jumped out to me that they lingered so much on different parts of the mural without mentioning anything about what it was depicting. It seemed very intentional, and it seems certain that these things will make sense later. I have no idea what the guy with the triangles is supposed to represent, and thought the choice to depict the image from Demerzel's toolkit, which has a picture of our solar system on it, was something to pay attention to. Just like Constant can't quit paying attention to Hober. I do think there's something going on there based on the voiceover, something to come in the future, and for the most part, it's been fun to watch. I was 50-50 on the Bel Rios scenes. The insertion and extraction tech and really the plan to send the most important person on the ship in this way to the surface doesn't do much for me. That was probably the low point, the whole fight and everything, even though it did serve a purpose. On the other hand, all the nods to book readers with Dusan were incredibly satisfying. I thought they handled it well because it's a ton of fan service, sort of, but the scene still works even if you haven't read the source material. And the way they set up the reveal of who he was and what they were talking about, it was all just really well put together from my point of view. And the actor did a fantastic job in his role. Another good week all around in the books to show department. Dr. Seldon explaining the developmental stages that all civilizations go through, his detached view of the church and his willingness to use their faith to get them to do what he wants anyway. Seeing Rios realize that the Foundation has outpaced the Empire's tech due to their stagnation was good to see. And lots of direct references, so let's hope they keep going in that direction.
I was your son, and you let me die. But why am I surprised? We both know it wasn't the first time.
The 5th episode of Foundation's 2nd season is all about memories. For the 2nd week in a row, we focus on 2 of the 4 main stories that we've been following. And we see how that idea of memory plays a crucial role in the story around Harry and his new body, and Brother Day's plans for an imperial marriage. Both Harry's and Salvor's memories are used against them. A wedge is formed between them when Brother Dawn and Dusk learn that Day has a unique power related to their memories. And Queen Sereth learns of Demerzel's big secret when she gets her hands on memories that show her in a compromising position. And since Sereth's quest for information about her family's accident acts as the bridge between episodes 4 and 5, let's start with her. Last week we learned when Rue returned to Cloud Dominion after being bedded by Cleon the 16th, the scientists there studied her memory manipulation to reverse engineer the process. That allowed them to offer protection to one of Cleon's personal guards whose memories are audited weekly in an effort to find out if Brother Day was behind the death of her family. In episode 5, Markley reports that he's unable to get a hold of anything related to the assassination attempt because it happened in Day's bedroom. This convinces Sereth that she needs to do what's necessary to get inside to look around for herself, so she sends word to Day that she wants to copulate. Brother Day and Demerzel prepare for his encounter, and it's clear that he's grown accustomed to her robotic charms in that regard. She assures him that he is a superstar lover with nothing to worry about, and says it's a good thing because he wanted to forge a real alliance rather than a paper one. She slips away with a sort of fist pump for encouragement and tells him to think of her. Despite Rue's concern, Sereth doesn't appear to be out of her element in Day's chambers, not at first anyway. But the truth is she's way more concerned with looking around than sleeping with him, and she notices the repairs from the attack and that he wears his aura even when he's intimate. There is some playful but ultimately awkward foreplay, and it's clear that Brother Day is uncomfortable. When he can't perform, he turns it on her, accusing her of putting on an act, which is true. And then the tone changes completely when he reveals that he knows she had a lover and lost them in the accident that killed her family. She immediately fires back with the question, "Why am I not surprised you know so much of my family's final days?" It escalates from there. He noticed that she was checking things out. She claims she did that because she was worried about her safety. She is going to live there together with him after all. And things devolved into a full-blown shouting match that ended in him assuring her that he could protect her, and then both parties agreeing to get married. Later, he'll explain to Demerzel that Sereth expects he killed her family, so he had to accuse her of trying to kill him. It got heated, and now they're engaged. The sex never happened, and Day really did look a little lost with a partner other than Demerzel, but both he and the future Empress Consort held their own in every other regard. The big reveal happens here when Demerzel assures him that she made sure there is no trail back to him for the killing of her family. She says it so matter-of-factly that I had to go back to make sure that's what she was saying. But it is, and that's one big mystery for this season solved. This means that Sereth is right about what happened, but then you pretty much believe Demerzel when she says she covered their tracks and that no one will find any proof. From there we flash back to 30 years earlier to Cleon the 16th's time with Rue. He looks a lot more at home with taking a lover than 17 was. And I suppose the stakes aren't the same, but there is a noticeable difference between these Cleons. The flashback turns out to be Dusk and Rue watching their video together in his room. They're snuggled up in bed, which suggests that some chemistry might still exist, or at the very least, she does a better job of faking it than Sereth did. She asks to go back to relive the moment when they first met at Gossamer Court, and he obliges. We see that she used a unique strategy of refusing to look up from her game when he approached, and quickly won over his affection. He's curious about her missing memory. She says she doesn't really notice it at all. She remembers taking his hand, and then she was on a transport home with a bite mark on her shoulder and a fat bank account. This leads to her bringing up something he hadn't considered when she says she could imagine if they have that ability, they might edit their own memories that they would rather forget. She realizes that it might cause problems because things can't be lost to history, but he explains that they would still be stored with their other audits in the memoriam. There's this idea of an end to regrets, and she says she wouldn't want to erase her memories even if she could, and that he's lucky to be able to trust his memory. The conversation and that last statement plant the seeds for what we see him do next when he goes to Demerzel to ask her about it and learns that only Brother Day has the authority to edit his memories, his own memories, but that also extends to editing Dusk and Dawn's. This is a change that happened after the attack because Day was suspicious that they might have played a part in that, and even when he found out that they were innocent, he kept his new exclusive power, which causes a problem for Dusk, because he points out that even though there are backups, they would never know if edits were made since it wouldn't feel like something was missing. Demerzel assures him that if Day did something that was out of line, she'd be forced to intervene since her directive is to at all times do what's best for Empire, not just Day. It's a reasonable assurance, and Dusk pretends to accept it, but the way that they present the scene, the way it's shot, certainly prompts the viewer to question how sincere she's being. In the meantime, Sereth tells Rue that the engagement's on, and everything she learned when she was in Day's bedchamber. She tells Markley they need to find out what happened in that room on the day of the attempt, and he explains there's no way to get access to a Cleon's memories. And from there, Sereth comes up with the idea to try to get access to someone who was there to take care of his wounds, one of the doctors who was there after things went down. He goes to see the keeper at the memoriam and gets the information. There is some pushback, but nothing he can't manage by saying he's just doing what he's been told. Markley brings them the recordings, and when they watch it, Sereth and Rue see Demerzel standing there with her head cut in half, and they now know that she was in the bedroom with him and that she's a robot. This is a pretty big deal, as they quickly point out as they're putting things together. Obviously, everyone has wondered how Demerzel has served all the Cleons for the past 4 centuries without aging. Sereth brought up that she must be a clone when they visited the Principium. Like everyone else, they believed that all the humaniform robots were destroyed millennia ago, and now they know the Genetic Dynasty is keeping at least one big secret from the public. In light of the new revelations about their memories, Dusk teams up with Dawn. First, they go to ask Cleon the First memory a question, which is a thing they can do apparently. They explain the situation, but Cleon isn't having it. He says they're all the same man, so basically there should be no problem. Envying Day is like envying themselves. Of course, they know this is no longer true because of genetic drift, but don't want to expose that fact to him. They try to bring up the idea that clones are genetically the same, but still have variations because of their temperaments, but this doesn't sway the original. He assures them that it's not a problem, and that's the end of the conversation. From there, they go see the Keeper, where they inadvertently cover Markley's tracks by brushing off his question about not finding what they were looking for earlier. They want to see how big their memory archives are, and ask for all 18 of them for the sake of comparison. As they wait, they bond over their diminishing importance. Dawn asks earnestly if they're in danger. After all, they're still Empire. They discuss a mural depicting Emperor Algarin, who was executed for high treason. There's a green stripe added after the fact to his mural to indicate this, and that opens the door for Dusk to discuss how he struggles with his personal legacy, saying that when a man is old, he doesn't care what he remembers, he cares how he's remembered. And he wonders aloud if they didn't do Dawn a favor by giving away his chair, because now he can have what he always wanted, and what every young man wants, to live a life and to love. There's a great line when he looks at Dawn and says, "I was so beautiful." It highlights all the interesting ways you can play with this idea of clones and the connections they still have, but also how Day is removing himself from their confidence with his actions. They find out that their memories more or less look similar to the other clones, but they notice that the original Cleon has almost 3 times as many as them. Dawn points out that he was special, so it's not that surprising, but Dusk thinks it's too much of a difference, and that things just don't add up. He says they won't do anything about it though, not yet, not until he can find some leverage. Elsewhere in the galaxy, Harry is visited by a vision of Rach who reminds him of some things that he might like to edit out of his own memory. His visitor tells him it's not a dream and that he's not alive. He did, in fact, die on the Deliverance. And it reads like a manifestation of Harry's regrets about what happened there, and that this vision of Rach doesn't want him to forget. He tells an emotional Harry that he has everyone fooled into thinking he cares about them, which is something that Gaal contradicts later. Rach says the truth is that he doesn't care about anyone, that they're all just points on a graph, and then he adds that they both know something like this happened before. It's not readily apparent to me what he's talking about here, and then he just disappears. This makes it sound like Harry has another secret he's keeping from everyone, something only Rach might know, and we'll find out later on Ignis that the new Mentalic character, Tellum Bond, is the one that's behind this. There's still no easy explanation for how he came to be inside this new body, and we do see him getting used to it. No big surprise, Salvor and Gaal would like to understand, but all he can tell them was that while he was in the Prime Radiant, Callie told him to come to Una's world. He was in the darkness of the cave, and the next thing he remembers is waking up next to Gaal in a body just like the one he had right before he died. Their quick conversation sort of works like a checklist for possibilities as they go through it. In the end, things seem to be pointing in the direction that he is in a clone body and Callie is a robot. Gaal jokes that after a century and a half, the genetic dynasty has a rival, and the irony isn't lost on Harry, and Salvor piles on saying, "And after all that trouble you went through to turn yourself into an idea." She tells them that she's picked up some transmissions and can see what the Foundation is up to. The whole selling psychohistory as magic and pushing Harry as a prophet in their religious phase. Harry makes the distinction that it's the other version in the vault that's their prophet, and adds that it was bound to happen because people do love to kneel. They make it to Ignis but lose control of the ship as they enter the atmosphere, causing Salvor to make a crash landing. On the way down, she noticed someone was watching them, and leaves to go looking because she would rather meet them outside. On the trail, she hears a noise, so she's able to get a jump on a hooded character holding a knife. At gunpoint, she has him remove his mask, and is shocked to see that it's Hugo. He tells her that after she left, he went into cryosleep too, syncing his pod to the beggar, so that he would be woken up automatically when she woke up. Skeptical as she is, it makes enough sense because being the third wheel with a mom she barely knows hasn't been as awesome as she thought it might be. And wouldn't it be great if Hugo was there? They kiss and it's heartfelt and it seems too good to be true because it is. Inside the ship, Harry apologizes to Gaal in one of the most human moments we've seen from him. He knows she's struggling with her vision of Salvor's death, and he offers that the whole premise of psychohistory is that the future isn't set in stone. Intellectually, Gaal understands this, but she also knows that all of her visions have come true. He would argue that on Synax she dreamt about the giant wave crashing down on her, and it didn't. But while this is technically true, there's still no way to know how they could change their decisions right now in a way that would save Salvor later. It just doesn't work that way. And this is far and away the most interesting conversation they've had. There's real sincerity in his words about Rach and Salvor being his granddaughter, but there's also the reality that none of that changes what he knows about psychohistory. So Gaal's insistence that he can't bring himself to care about anyone isn't the complete picture. The plan affects everyone, and knowing what he knows gives him a sense of responsibility. To act in accordance with that means to overlook the way his decisions relate to individuals. This comes out when Gaal is asking about how they would know which of their actions would stop Salvor's fate. Matter-of-factly, they can't. They both understand this, and the extra layer for Harry is that even if they could, would it be right to intervene anyway? He gives her some good advice to make the most out of the time he has with Salvor right now, since not everyone gets that, and then they see her return with Hugo. This sets off alarm bells for Harry right away, and he tells Gaal to hide the Prime Radiant and not tell him where it is. He locks them out, and when he realizes he can't prove his suspicions that this person isn't Hugo, he tells Salvor to retransfer control of the ship to him because it would still recognize him biologically. And then things break down from there. Gaal notices others approaching the ship. Hugo is revealed to be a local man who can make themselves look like anyone, I guess, and access Salvor's memories of Hugo. And then his cohorts breach the Beggar's Hall with a charge. After a brief struggle, they gain control and they do something with their minds to make everyone fall asleep. Gaal, Harry, and Salvor wake up as prisoners, though not really in a cell. Instead, they're in an abandoned Imperial summer palace, which looks like it's from another time, almost ancient. Harry says it likely belonged to Emperor Kandar V. But before they can get into the history, Gaal and Salvor hear voices in their heads calling to them. They make their way to what looks like a ceremony and meet a child and her followers that introduces herself as Tellum Bond. She welcomes them, and when Salvor only introduces herself with her first name rather than her full name, and where she's from like the others did, Tellum provides the rest of the information for her. Before long, Harry notices that the child doesn't cast a shadow and asks the real Tellum Bond to end the charade to reveal herself. She does, saying she wanted to watch them without them watching back, and that she thought Harry might be the one to figure it out since the mentally incomplete compensate in other ways. She explains that Ignis is a refuge, and that they made it there because they heard her voice calling to them. At least Gaal and Salvor because of their abilities, which people like to call mentalics, but she prefers the term sighted. They're not alone in their abilities, and as Gaal knows, they can make them stand out. In Tellum's case, people misread her abilities as her being a goddess, but many of the others had a much worse response on their home planets, which is evident in the scars that they carry. She thought Ignis could serve as a haven for the sighted, so she called them all there. She's mostly welcoming, but clearly singles Harry out because of his lack of sight, which switches things up because now he's the outsider here. He's not only famous, but he's famously dead, and she says when she looks into his mind, it's very murky in there. She appeared to him as Rach on the beggar to try to figure out how he got his new body, and still has no idea how that happened. She understands that Harry wants to use her people for his plan, and promises to meet the next day because everyone is exhausted after having these new people here. The episode ends with her tipping her hand, though. After they leave, she tells her followers that she's going to find the Prime Radiant and break it, and that there isn't going to be a second Foundation. There hasn't really been a bad episode of Foundation this season. We got another important character introduction, just a ton of stuff happening for multiple characters across both storylines, and maybe the biggest surprise in an episode with plenty of Cleon gold is that a Gaal and Harry scene overshadowed it all. On the structural level, I like that they have the confidence to leave parts of the story out week to week. Not following up with Belrios and Hober Mallow allows them to fully realize everything here, just as leaving Brother Day and Gaal out did last week. And weaving the idea of memory into what each of the characters is dealing with gives it a real sense of cohesion. I mentioned a few examples in the beginning, but there are way more. There's a moment at the end when Harry is watching Tellum say she has no idea how he got a body. And it's like a light bulb went off over my head, thinking, oh, he's missing that memory, which is exactly what Dusk and Dawn are worried about. Plus, this is an entire planet of people who can access memories, and we don't know exactly what they can do except for what we've seen from Tellum and Lauren. But I think it's safe to say that more situations will arise where characters aren't sure if they can trust their thoughts or their memories. There was some actual comedy here with Demerzel's fist pump and Day's delivery of "we're engaged." But the thing that really got to me the most was when Dusk tells Rue that the footage we're watching was assembled from many lenses at Gossamer Court. I'm not sure why. It has something to do with the self-referential aspect of it that sort of toes the line of breaking the fourth wall. Even when I think about it now, I can't help but chuckle because obviously they didn't want to make it look like security cam footage, so that line is just perfect. But anyways, there is a lot of fascinating stuff going on in this episode. A surprising amount for an episode that had a shorter runtime than most. What I'm most interested in is how Demerzel reacts to Sereth knowing her secret, and how that will even come up. I don't imagine that she can pull that playful but snarky attitude like she did with Day. Then I'm curious to see how the Mentalics use Harry's outsider status against him, and if or how they would try to create a wedge between him and Gaal. Because the second Foundation does need to happen. He explained why that was necessary. And we've seen the loyalty Gaal has to Harry, even if she's reluctant. But then here are these people who understand her and Salvor, which is to say that it seems like there's potential for things to go off the rails completely in both sides of this story. And that's not to mention that you have Hober Mallow going off on a secret mission, Polly and Constant heading into Trantor on a diplomatic mission, Dawn and Dusk feeling left out and unimportant, and Belrios out there with a lot of naval ships learning that the Foundation is outpacing their technology. It's all pretty exciting, and I want to get into all of it. So Tuesday night, I'm going to have Jim and Aaron from Bald Move on for a mid-season live stream so we can have a more in-depth conversation. The final thing I wanted to touch on here was the introduction of Mentalics and a little bit of books to show to cap things off. The idea of Mentalics is an Asimov idea, and one that he came up with to help solve the problem I mentioned a couple of videos back, that if psychohistory could predict the future, then it was hard to come up with ways to keep things exciting. The show had the advantage of being able to introduce some of these ideas earlier and showcase the effects of having outliers like Gaal and Salvor, and show how they can be disruptive to the plan. It seems like they're putting their own spin on what the term Mentalics can actually mean, but what I really like about their approach is the way that having Harry still around connects things together. In this episode, he's forced to reckon with his creation in a way that wasn't possible in the books, and I'm excited to see how they use Jared Harris to deliver some of the human drama that's built into that in the TV format where that works so well.
The Outer Reach, how exotic. Unfortunately, I believe the Imperium no longer recognizes a number of those planets.
Yes, the so-called barbarian worlds. Precisely the issue we barbarians are here to address.
The 6th episode in Foundation's 2nd season deals with the idea of faith. This isn't the first time since the Foundation has entered its religious phase, and it made me think that a few episodes back when I described Brother Constant, I called her a true believer based on her faith in Harry Seldon's plan. After a touch of overindulgence in the eye of the Empire on the Prophet's expense account, Polly Verisov's words make a distinction between belief and faith, and I think this is an interesting idea that relates to all the different stories. In Polly's view, he was there to see Harry Seldon walk out of the vault, so it was easy for him to believe. But Constance's generation only had second or third hand accounts to go off, so their faith required a bigger commitment. There's an interesting distinction there. And you can apply this to Gaal, who finds herself in the middle of a tug-of-war between Tellum and Harry, whose different positions require her to move in the direction of one or the other, or Salvor, who is still the odd man out and not sure what she should believe, or even Hober, who didn't have a lot of faith in anything but himself, and who finds himself in the middle of something by the end of this episode. And then you have Brother Day, who has a unique belief in himself that hasn't existed in the clones that preceded him, and it doesn't seem like that's leading him in the right direction. Oh, and it's also about revenge. The title's a reference to Yana telling Harry about the saying, "The gods made wine to compensate those who can't afford revenge." In her mind, if the Empire wants to hurt them, then why not turn things around and hurt the Empire? It sounds a little too reckless for Harry when he first hears this, but the fact that he requests the text by that author when he eventually arrives on Trantor years later after her death is a pretty strong indicator that he's changed his mind. And that's not even to mention that he traded in the clean-shaven look he had on Helicon for the Walter White goatee he's wearing when he faces the increased gravity on Trantor. Hober Mallow's story is the quickest to get through, so why don't we start there? We see him arrive at the coordinates Dr. Seldon gave him in the vault, only to find out there's nothing there. Not at first, anyway. After his ship starts to malfunction and Becky gets a little anxious, an absolutely giant, what I guess we'll call a ship, appears in the distance. He docks the Spirit and enters what turns out to be the Spacer's home swarm. We don't get a better description of that, and this thing looks really otherworldly, so if it's not a ship, I guess it's a mobile artificial planet, because it obviously moves around. They don't look happy that he's there, but we only see them ask who he is and why he's there before it cuts away. Although we can kind of put together why Harry sent him there from clues in previous episodes and a brief exchange Constant has with the Spacer when she arrives on Trantor. Belrios had been exiled to a prison world where they mined a substance called opalesque. After he was reinstated and returned to his ship, She-Ben's Light made a joke about him mining for all those years and not bringing her any. We know that the Empire is dependent on these genetically modified humans to navigate their jump ships, and this practice has been in place for 600 years or so. From that conversation, it appears that spacers need opalesque to live how they do or something along those lines, and they can only get it from the Empire. In exchange, the Empire gets what amounts to slave labor on their ships. This arrangement would also keep things exclusive and keep anyone else from controlling jump ships prior to the Foundation's breakthrough with their whisper ships. So from all of that, we can imagine that Harry thinks he might be able to upset the Empire's arrangement or disrupt their ability to jump around the galaxy freely or something along those lines, which could present real problems for the Cleons. And based on the other things we've been watching in this season, it would just be adding to a growing list of problems. We see Brother Day hold an event where he speaks to the public and members of the Galactic Council. He unveils a new statue of Cleon I's mother, Winneset, the last Galactic Empress, and then introduces Sereth as his future bride and therefore the next Empress. This makes his intention to end the genetic dynasty official, and we don't get much insight into what the Galactic Council thinks about this, or who they are, or what they do, really, but Dusk and Dawn are clearly not pleased. Of course, by design, Demerzel is hard to read, but it stands out that they cut to a shot of her touching her bracelet as he says the words. While it's her job to serve the Cleons, to me this indicates that she's struggling with conflicting thoughts. After he's made his announcement and is about to leave, Sereth surprises him, and not in a good way, when she starts addressing the crowd. She basically promises to be a leader who will serve the people, and her flowery words elicit a collective "what the hell are you doing" response from everyone on the platform. Elsewhere on Trantor, I mentioned that Constant and Polly are now there. After Polly explains he's on a diplomatic mission from the Outer Reach to their version of customs and immigration, they set off for a night out in the capital. When they return to their room, he has Constant flush his drugs, and seems to be on a path to rehabilitation where he delivers that speech about belief and faith And then the customs officer returns to take them into custody in a scene that feels like a direct callback to Gaal's first night on Trantor. This makes us reevaluate Dr. Seldon's decision to send them there in the first place. This seems like a fairly predictable outcome given the current situation. It brings into question Vault Harry's intentions, but that's something we'll come back to on Ignis through what the other Harry tells Salvor. For now, things don't look great for the religious pilgrims. At this point, it would seem pretty shocking if they both ended up executed or something along those lines. Objectively, Constant would be the character who has more legs, and that Polly is nearing the end of his natural life either way, and he has experienced some great things already, but we'll have to wait to learn more about their fates because their part of the episode ends there. Everything else in the episode is related to Ignis. Salvor tells Harry she's been having strange dreams ever since they arrived. She thinks it's the place and that other people's dreams are bleeding into hers. This makes Harry glad he's not a mentalic, but that's probably not a feeling that he holds on to for long. Salvor talks to the young boy Josiah, who we met in the previous episode, and he tells her that the mentalics all communicate silently in a practice they call unvoicing. She can't do it naturally, but he's certain that she'll be able to learn, and he explains that Tellum taught them by using their own unique musical pitch. He has a very noticeable scar on his neck and explains that he got it because he's always been able to hear other people's thoughts. He's able to touch her and share his memory of a flashback of his family being killed by an angry mob, with Tellum arriving right after his throat was cut. She's horrified by what he's been through and moved to see that Tellum saved him, and he says that she's saved everyone on the planet. When they join the rest of the group, they also touch her and pass on their personal stories to show that this is true. When they meet with Tellum, she explains that mentalics are generally seen in two ways: as gods among men or wolves among sheep. Because the god thing gets old and the wolf thing gets you killed, she prefers her plan of them keeping to themselves. This philosophy means that she's not interested in her children becoming Harry's second foundation. She's seen the outlines of psychohistory in Gaal's mind and feels like Harry is trying to make an army out of her collective that seems more than capable of staying hidden in this sanctuary they've developed. He brings up Gaal's vision of the mule, which means they won't be able to hide forever, and Tellum doesn't believe that Gaal can really see the future. From the time they've set foot on Ignis, we've seen that mentalics are capable of doing some amazing things, but apparently none of them have true precognitive abilities. So once again, Gaal is an outlier. Salvor pushes Gaal to show Tellum the vision, which does appear to convince her, and then they go off to have a private conversation. They discuss how things are sticky with the Salvor situation. They've just met, and it feels like she should love her, but it's still kind of weird and all of that. In relation to the vision, Tellum says she can't accept an inescapable future, and neither should Gaal. In her mind, their actions have to mean something. She seems genuinely supportive, but also sees an angle of her own. She plants the seed that Harry's influence is the problem, and that he prevents Gaal from knowing what her vision is because it's been filtered through perceptions that were shaped by him. Then on her way out, she reveals that it's Salvor's birthday. She's having a private conversation with Harry. She makes a great point that Harry was essentially immortal, and putting him in a body just made him more vulnerable. She's been trying to figure out why this Callie figure would want to do that. Harry figures it's because a messianic story requires death and resurrection. She counters that he already had that when the other version emerged from the vault and offers a different motivation. What if Calais was worried that he would reduce everyone to numbers if he wasn't careful? Maybe she wanted him to have some skin in the game. This is all filtered through the lens of her not wanting Gaal to forget that there are people on all those planets she's saving. They discuss Gaal's blaming Harry for what happened to Rach and the future she envisioned with him. And it comes out that Rach deserves some of the blame because he knew everything. He knew they were doomed and he kept that information to himself. And he still chose to be with her. Harry says the heart wants what the heart wants and says that Gaal won't turn into him with Salvor by her side. He thinks she cares too much about what her daughter thinks of her. While they're talking, Harry realizes that it must be hard for Salvor to be on Ignis focusing on the third crisis while Terminus faces the second. She believes they'll win because they have to, but she can't help but feel that she's helping him build an army specifically to fight the people she swore to protect. Harry explains that the point is not to fight the First Foundation. They just need to prod them when necessary. And she wonders then about Vault Seldon, why can't he do that? And he explains that his fundamental knowledge has been edited. He only knows part of the plan. He can't know that this Harry exists because his information has to be limited. This Harry has the ability to monitor what he's doing through the Prime Radiant because of the way they're connected. And that means to look into that is to look into what the other one is doing. Tellum stops by the beggar to officially have a one-on-one with Gaal, but also to try to find the Prime Radiant, which I think just turns out to be unfolded and hidden in plain sight on the table. Later, we'll see Dr. Taj overlook it in Harry's office on Helicon while it's laid out the same way, so as far as I can tell, there's no top secret hiding place that they're missing. They have a back and forth with a lot of twists and turns, and even a brief battle where we get some insights into how the Mentalics use their powers. But what it all comes down to is that Tellum is not well and wants Gaal to become her replacement. She believes her children would follow her, and she'll prepare her by teaching her to use her gifts. She can even call them the Second Foundation if she wants to, because even though he's still more than 100 years in the future, she is concerned about the mule. What Gaal gets is the tools that could help keep Salvor alive, and all she has to give up in return is Harry. Tellum is very protective of the Mentalics. She doesn't want any outsiders there at all, and for that reason, Harry would have to go. They go out and find them, and Gaal tells Harry that the Mentalics will only follow one of their own, that he needs to let her take the lead. He immediately turns things around and asks if Tellum offered to save Salvor in return. Did she make her believe that that was possible? And he points out the problem of forming an alliance with someone who can put anything in your head. While he's talking, it looks like something is going on with his mind. We see the frame sort of go out of focus around the edges. And then Tellum asks him about what happened on Helicon. She puts out some specific details from an accident that we'll see later. And then he storms off saying, if you can't trust your own mind, then what have you got? Salvor catches up with Harry, who doesn't look well and is barely coherent when she asks about Makota Mesa. He tells her they're after the Prime Radiant, it's on the beggars, and it won't look like itself. Find it, protect Gaal, she needs you, and then he leaves. She goes to Gaal, who presents her with a nice piece of fruit for her birthday, and it's awkward, but also kind of sweet, and they have one of their more sincere mother and daughter moments. It's cut short, though, because they hear the beggar's engines firing up, and when they look, they see what they think is Harry piloting it and taking off. This all turns out to be a sleight of hand by Laron and the other Mentalics, and we find out that Tellum has the real Harry chained up in a pool of rising water that is currently up to his shoulders. They took the beggar so they can continue to search for the Prime Radiant. The plan is to find it and destroy it. Gaal and Salvor will think Harry left them there, and Tellum can get rid of her problem by drowning Harry. It doesn't seem like Gaal will be alright with that, but she thinks that she can just control their minds, essentially, and tell her that they only kill when they need to for nourishment and self-defense, and that's her plan. As Harry struggles against the rising tide, he has a flashback to his childhood when he was with his parents, who are shepherds. They shepherd these flying animals off a cliff so that they can graze on a moon that the planet shares an atmosphere with. These moon strikes can only do that if they can break free from the planetary gravity, so they have to really work at it. They have to be running really fast when they go over. And the young Harry studies the way they approach the cliff and spots a pattern, which he uses to scare the hell out of his parents when he walks out and stands in the middle of their stampede without getting hurt. Then we jump forward some to see the day when he first meets his life partner, Yana. He's speaking to this character, Dr. Taj, who is expressing concerns that Empire has about his research into psychohistory, and Yana appears outside his office. It's clear the way that this is set up that she knows who he is and about his work and that she wants to work with him. So when she goes in and sets up in his office and tells Dr. Taj not to worry about psychohistory, it's all part of her plan. And after she leaves, Yana tells Harry that she thinks his work is brilliant, but he just needs some help to make it practical, and that's the help that she's there to give. We see that their relationship gets romantic. They move in together, and we see Harry bring home the prototype of the Prime Radiant to show her. She tells him she's pregnant and that they're having a girl, and gives him a chain to wear that lets him feel their heartbeats right there on his chest. He has a pretty public argument with Dr. Taj outside his office, and it's all in response to her bringing him a generous offer of full professorships at Streeling University on Trantor, which we know he'll eventually work at. Harry is against the idea on principle and underestimates how much pressure is on Taj to deliver him or the Prime Radiant to Empire. Yana tries to get him to consider it because she believes they won't stop until they get what they want, and that because Dr. Taj's life is on the line, there's a real chance that things could get out of hand, but he says he can't do it. He says it would be impossible for him to work there, that it would be suffocating. She does try to spin things around with the revenge angle that I brought up earlier, saying that they should go there because when they're there, that's the best place for them to undermine the Empire, but he won't listen. And this decision will cost Yana her life after she's taken hostage. Taj is trying to get Harry to give up the Prime Radiant. Because of the chain she gave him, he knows the exact moment when this goes wrong, and both her and the unborn baby die. He sets up an exchange with Taj, and he hacks her car and her gun and really sets up a plan to take her out. He takes her to the cliff where the Moonshrikes are shepherded and gets his revenge for Yana by killing her. He sort of gives her a chance to talk her way out of it, but I find it interesting how they set this up because Yana's death and his decision that led to that are things that will bother him for the rest of his life. Obviously, we're seeing him thinking about this in his dying moments, but we're also seeing him make a decision to carry this out in a very vindictive way. This is certainly not the first idea you come up with when you're wanting to get revenge on someone and kill them. He does decide beforehand, and he plans it out in this big gesture that is absolutely terrifying for his victim. And all of these things are decisions, so what does that tell us about this character? Then we see that he's taken the job on Trantor. And I don't know how you interpret that other than to say that he's following through with her plan of being on Trantor so he can get his revenge against Empire. This is an additional layer, because prior to this, the only motivation we thought that Harry had was that he developed psychohistory, he saw what the math was saying, and he wanted to help mankind. Knowing that Empire is responsible for Yana means that it's at least a little bit personal. Then the episode ends when we return to Ignis to see him die. As Salvor brought up earlier, his new body did make him vulnerable, and Tellum followed through on her promise. This is one of those episodes that almost had too much going on for me to really enjoy it as much as I did some of the other ones. There's a ton of interesting stuff in every scene, but it had the effect that my mind didn't move on from one place to the next as easily as I'd grown accustomed to. I suppose right in the middle of the season it makes sense that you'd run into this with so many balls in the air, and so I'm curious to see where things go next. I was rather shocked that they gave Harry a new body just to kill him off. There was this sense of him and Salvor coming around to each other, and now I imagine she'll have to step up to pull Gaal out from under Tellum's control. Because we're still dealing with the inevitability of there being a second foundation, but you can't really see that working out without some sort of reckoning with Tellum after she did this. Learning more about Harry's backstory certainly made him more of a complicated character, and I guess they could just continue that story in future flashbacks. But I also wonder if this is really the end of his consciousness, since it's been resurrected once already from its digital form. This was a sad story. You see that he has regrets for things that he did, things that he could have done differently, and how the whole situation affects him in the way that he deals with everyone else, like in the part of the story that we've already seen. I was very interested to see the Spacers get introduced, and I hope we see more of Hober's story with them in the next episode. Just like I was hoping to see Sareth reveal that she knew Demerzel was a robot in this episode. It's interesting that Dr. Seldon knew where to find them, and I wonder what they'll think about the Whisper ship that would on the one hand make them obsolete, but on the other might be their path to freedom. Brother Day's arrogance was fun to watch, and what I think was a smart move by Sareth, even though it pissed him off, it does give her more visibility and maybe makes it harder for him to just dispose of her. Was she being sincere in what she said? I don't think at this point there's any way to say for sure. The other thing about the Empire side of things was I feel like this is the first time we saw the Galactic Council. I know they were mentioned in the season 1 finale, but they haven't really played much of a part in how we see Empire run things. So I was a little disappointed we didn't see more of them.
Hence my line of questioning. When the time comes, I want to know. Will you serve me?
I will serve Empire.
There are many different kinds of prisons, and as the 7th episode of Foundation's 2nd season jumps around between its different storylines and characters, we see that in a way all of them are in one. Polly Verisov and Brother Constant might be the only characters who are actually detained in a cell, but it's striking how almost everyone's actions and decisions are constrained in one way or another. You have the indentured servitude of the Spacers, the self-imposed lockdown that Gaal is trying to place on her mind, Queen Sareth's realization that Empire now owns her, and Bel Rios' belief in putting duty above all. But then we get signs that even the most powerful characters aren't immune. You know, the ones that are making things terrible for everyone else. Is Demerzel's situation that much different than the Spacers? Is the fate of Brother Day's empire defined by psychohistory? Is what Tellum is doing to her followers, or what Vault Harry has done to his, okay given the alternatives? None of these are questions that have straightforward answers, and that makes them the kinds of things you want to be thinking about as a TV show season moves into its final few episodes. We still don't know exactly how Hober Mallow got on Dr. Seldon's radar, but we do see him cross paths with one of this season's other new characters in this episode. The last time we saw Hober, he was being questioned by the Spacer who we find out is named She Is Center, who really isn't happy to see him. She doesn't even believe that it should be possible because they randomized their jumps, but he explains that he was sent there by Harry Seldon, who in his words is a good predictor. You get the sense that their rules call for him to be thrown outside without a suit now that he knows what their location is, but he earns a stay of execution by producing a vial of opalesque, the micronutrient they need because of their modifications, which he isn't sure the Empire made them dependent on, but that he is sure they take advantage of. Empire needs Spacers to navigate their jump ships. Spacers need opalesque to function, and it's supposed to be impossible to synthesize, so they trade 10% of their offspring to get what they need. Hober has an offer that's high risk, but the reward might be worth it because not only would they get their opalesque now that the Foundation figured out how to make it, but they would also get their freedom. The kicker is that now that the Foundation has perfected whisper ships, Spacers are on their way to becoming obsolete as navigators. How confident can they be that Empire would still provide them with their fix if they no longer needed their service? He makes a pretty compelling argument, and she does seem to be considering helping the Foundation kick Empire in the nuts. On the Destiny, Glawen is reading the Bhagavad Gita while Bella's watching Cleon's dedication ceremony when She-Ben's light calls them to the bridge. She's reviewed the footage from Sowena and says she's never seen a singularity fold as small as the one created by the Whisper ship. They wonder how it's possible for them to navigate without Spacers and this idea of organic computing, and Glawen throws out the idea that they might be growing brain tissue without a host. This is so far out there compared to anything I might have guessed that was going on, it makes me think that this is probably what's happening. Before She-Ben's light can respond to that, she gets a message from She Is Center, who is tempted by his offer, but fears that they could lose everything if Empire finds out they talked to Hober. So she offers to bring him to the Destiny and turn both him and his ship, the Spirit, over. When they arrive, we find out that the two Spacers are mother and daughter, and they get to share a moment together, which She Is Center admits is part of the reason she came. As she's releasing the cuffs, you notice that there's something on Hober's wrist right before he tries to escape. He's no match for Glawen, who whoops him, and he has no choice but to yield. When they try to board the Spirit, Becky emerges to return the whooping and buy him enough time to escape. As they watch him go, nobody on the home swarm thinks he'll be able to jump, but he does just that. Bell reports to Day and Demerzel that the Foundation technology has officially outpaced theirs, and that Seldon sent Mallow to meet with the Spacers and try to tempt them. This is a signal that the Foundation is preparing for war, and makes Day wonder if they could have been behind the assassination attempt. Demerzel points out that this is their problem, that they just don't know. Day cuts off communications without giving Bell orders, and then we see Glaywin press him a little bit about what he thinks Empire wants him to do, and they get into an argument. The idea of him disobeying an order comes up, and he lays out the situation, saying that if he did that, Day wouldn't kill him, he'd kill Glaywin. Then he would torture him by making him watch it over and over again, and in the end it wouldn't change anything because someone else would just follow the order anyway. They get into it more in his quarters, and he illustrates just how impossible the current situation is. And while Glaywin thinks the Foundation might be a viable alternative, Bell doesn't believe they could be ready based on how big the Imperium is. He talks about the power vacuum that would be left behind, and they go back and forth where Glaywin is somewhat checking his partner to make sure the real Bell is still in there, because at the end of it all, they're just in an impossible spot. The general is still of the same mind he was before. He can't change things, but he can try to do right by the people because a weak emperor needs a strong general. I usually find Demerzel to be the most interesting character to watch, and her story was the one that stood out to me in this episode. We see the immigration officer that took Polly and Constant into custody brief her and Brother Day. He asked about their robes, and Demerzel explains that they're wearing clerical vestments as members of the Church of Harry Seldon. This gets his attention, and he thinks aloud that just as General Rios arrives in the Outer Reach reaches out. This is potentially a distraction to his marriage preparations right on the heels of Sarah's public display of her populist tendencies, which makes Demerzel question if Day is having second thoughts. He clearly is, but it doesn't appear that he'll be capable of backing down. So they share a moment where he reassures Demerzel that there will always be a place for her with his family. Even if his children don't resemble him, they will be Empire. There's more going on inside his head here, but we'll come back to that because it doesn't become clear until later. Another thing that hasn't been clear to me is where Demerzel stands on this idea of ending the genetic dynasty. It looked like she was experiencing internal conflict in the last episode when he was publicly announcing his intentions, and here after he leaves the room, she appears to be experiencing dissonance. There's a brief scene where Rue gives Sarah some solid advice when she sees how pleased the Queen is seeing Cleon's reaction to her speech. Even though he's clearly taken by her, possibly because she treats him with contempt, there's one thing you shouldn't do with a man like that. You should never embarrass them, full stop. And as Sareth is promising she'll be careful, Demerzel interrupts them. Now that the wedding has been announced, she needs to take her to Empire's doctors for a final examination before they start to try to produce an heir. They try to put it off, but learn that it's less of a request and more of an order. It's on their walk that Sareth reveals that she knows her secret, and Demerzel confirms that she's a humaniform robot. Because they were all supposed to be destroyed, Sareth asks if there are any others out there. Demerzel, who could definitely be lying, says that to her knowledge, she's the last of her kind. She adds that she served the dynasty since the reign of Cleon I, which makes Sareth wonder if she served different masters before that. Demerzel responds not exactly, and this is where it starts to feel like we're moving in the direction of getting some answers about Demerzel's situation. For a long time, all robots were bound by 3 laws. Laws that made them unable to harm humans or allow harm to come to them. Now Demerzel is only bound by 1 law, which compels her to serve Empire. Sareth is mostly concerned about whether or not this means that Demerzel will serve her once she marries Day. But based just on what she says in that short back and forth, the Cleons have altered her programming so that her loyalty to them overwrites everything else. And the way Demerzel turns this into a threat is a treat to watch, because she not only dashes any thoughts Sareth might have had about having the upper hand in their relationship, but she lets her know that she'll still be an outsider even after she marries into the family, while making it explicit that she could kill her if that ever becomes necessary. And it doesn't end there, because they go for her examination, which is purposefully weird, with a large crowd on hand to sort of gawk at her while she has her legs spread. This sets up the episode's funniest line when Sarah says, "Are you joking? I can argue in any position." She makes one more attempt to land a shot on Demerzel by utilizing that they're in front of a lot of people and just sort of letting it slip that essentially Demerzel is Brother Day's sex toy. It turns out to be an effective way to end the exam and clear the room, but it also takes things to a new place that she really wasn't prepared for. Demerzel says she knows Sareth believes Cleon killed her family, and warns her that if she's thinking of getting revenge, then she should think about her family dying in agony with the air burning around them, because that's the kind of precision she brings to her work. This makes Sareth's situation pretty clear, and the two go their separate ways. The queen goes to see her betrothed and brings up her family again, which clearly makes him uncomfortable. She goes through and mentions each of them individually and then hints that she knows he killed them. He doesn't deny it, and instead tells her that she's there by some uncanny combination of good fortune and his grace. Which is to say, yeah, I made that accident happen and there's nothing you can do about it. Faced with that reality, she goes to talk to Brother Dawn. They use facial scramblers to conceal their identities and go to the heat sinks, where he learned that they can't be listened to during his grand tour of all of Trantor's different sectors when he turned 17. In desperation, she tells him about Demerzel's admission and about Day confirming it. Dawn is surprised, but not that surprised, and asks what she wants from him. She admits there isn't much she can do. Even though she sees Day as a monster, she'll still have to go through with the wedding, but she believes Dawn is different. She believed that from the first time they met, based not on the reality that the genetic drift has actually made them different, but because of his kind eyes. She reveals that her bodyguard stole the device to reverse sterilization from the exam room, and she wants Dawn to use it so that she can carry his child instead. Dawn says that this would be suicide, but she counters that it's really a bloodless coup. The episode opened with a quick check-in with Polly and Constant in their cell. He was experiencing some withdrawal and feeling like he had failed the prophet, and she tried to put a positive spin on things, but she didn't appear to be as up to the task as we've come to expect. They're taken to the throne room and they present Brother Day with an atomic ashtray, which might only be funny if you've read the books. He's not impressed, and Lee Pace delivers the second funniest line of the episode when he responds, "Oh, absurd." Polly tries to give them a pitch asking for the Foundation to be recognized on the global stage. And while Brother Day is entertained, he isn't interested since he knows that Hober Mallow tried to cut a deal with the Spacers. Polly did not know this and is shocked, but before he can get to the bottom of that, Harry appears there, having hitched a ride somehow in Constant. They show a flashback to him kissing her head, which shows us when that happened, and Demerzel says that they picked this up when she was scanned at immigration, but this is another surprise for Polly. Day puffs up and demands to know what Harry has to say, and he basically says that the Foundation is much stronger than he thinks they are, and says that they're suing for peace not because they fear they would lose, because they know with mathematical certainty that if there is a war that they'll win. Brother Day has a response for this that he feels pretty good about. You see, he studied Seldon when he was younger, when he had time to read, and though he found it a bit disappointing to learn that one man couldn't change much, he was very pleased to find out that he was an exception, that he explicitly could change things. Because he knows that one of the main sticking points is that the genetic dynasty is playing a role in the Empire's collapse. But this Day has already decided to end it. So in his mind, Harry's predictions are outdated, which is kind of a surprise because up until this point, it seemed like it was more about him embracing his individuality. But I guess now we know that he's doing this because of psychohistory, at least on some level. And it's hard to read Harry, but I think it's safe to say that he looks surprised. Brother Day tells Demerzel to order Belrios to form an enclosure around Terminus, saying that if the Foundation has technology that's worth having, then it belongs to Empire. Then he has his guards do what can only be described as shock Harry out of Constant. which isn't the end of Harry because he mentioned in that conversation that most of him is still on Terminus in the vault. This is just a small part of him. They're able to get rid of that, and when she comes to, she says that she knew he was there, but whenever she tried to say anything about it, he would stop her. Cleon points out how this kind of violation is pretty messed up, and he's not wrong. Then he has his guards take them away. On Ignis, Salvor goes looking for Gaal, and when she finds her counting primes on top of a rock, we see her turn around and she uses her powers and it hits her and she knocks her down. Everything about this is a little weird, but they don't linger on it very long because Salvor is tired of sitting around now that Harry took off with their ship. Gaal says that he had to do it because he would never be accepted there, but Salvor isn't so hot on being accepted anyway. She just wants to leave, which Gaal won't do because she believes they need the Mentalics for the mule, which she also doesn't think Salvor is taking seriously enough. What she is taking seriously is her feeling that there is something wrong with Ignis. She thinks it's way too soon to bank their future on Tellum, senses that Gaal is trying to hide something from them based on the whole counting primes on top of a rock thing, and for all that she's heard about this place being so open, makes her think it's suspicious that she can't read anyone there. Josiah interrupts saying that they'll feel better after they eat and tells them that everyone is preparing for a feast. Laron talks to Salvor about her gifts while he's preparing the day's catch, and when she notices him looking at a boat in the distance, he breaks away and tells her it's time to eat. When he pours the ghost mollusks into the boiling water, both Gaal and Salvor experience their pain. It's a big surprise and it makes them feel terrible. Tellum is there and she acts like it's normal and that it's actually a good thing. She says that suffering is the price of admission, because their philosophy is not to shy away from it, but to honor the pain. If you feel everything, you don't take more than you need. When they sit down to eat, one of the other Mentalics asks Gaal about the mule. She explains that he's a conqueror who sees them as a threat that will find them in 152 years. Then she tells them about Harry and psychohistory, which was so accurate it was almost like magic, but it had a problem because there were outliers. Outliers like the mule and like them. She gives what, from her perspective, is an inspirational speech, and everyone's listening and they all seem to be paying attention. But then she suggests that they should stop hiding so that more sighted people would be drawn out, and by the time the mule came looking for them, they'd be ready. And this threw me off a little bit because I can't help but think that this goes against everything Tellum has been telling them since they got there. And we see her look at Laron and give him a nod that feels pretty ominous. Later, Salvor finds out that the nav data was erased, which is weird, but she thinks she can recover it from the cache. Gaal comes over and tries to get her to stop. They have this back and forth where they're both kind of talking past each other. Gale's acting strange, trying to hide something. Salvor doesn't really notice because she's worried about how everyone there is looking at Gaal as a savior. She talks about how people thought she was special and how that didn't work out that well, and says her piece, but it doesn't inspire Gaal to come clean. She just says it's not the right time to start pulling threads, and that Salvor doesn't have to trust the Mentalics, but she does have to trust her. Unsurprisingly, Salvor waits until everyone else is asleep and sneaks back to the boat. She recovers the cache and retraces the route where she discovers Harry's body, which is still there and still looking pretty dead. She swims over to it to investigate, but then Tellum appears behind her. She says that she wants this place to be a sanctuary. Sometimes you have to absorb the pain because sometimes a little death is necessary. Then she does one of her mentalic tricks that knocks Salvor out, and the episode ends with her body floating there next to Harry's. Although, unlike the ending of the last episode, this doesn't feel like her death scene at all. With the exception of the Ignis storyline, which feels a little stalled out now that Tellum has killed Harry, there is a real sense of things coming together in this episode. Everything is in motion, everything is moving, and the pieces are promising to fall into place. And it's not like that's not happening on Ignis, but with Gaal sort of closing herself off as a way to protect Salvor, and with us knowing that there isn't much chance of Tellum sticking around, it feels like it's just delaying the inevitable. I don't think what happened at the end is even supposed to play as a cliffhanger because of course she'll survive. So I don't know, let's get on with it. Let's see what's going to happen there. Bellen Glawen's story has some of that to a lesser extent, but at least there it does feel like it's setting him up to make a critical decision at some point. And beyond that, everything else is popping. I mentioned that I'm usually most intrigued by Demerzel's story, and from interviews and things that showrunner David S. Goyer has said, we know we have an origin story coming, or at least we're going to find out more about how she ended up with the Cleons in the first place. So this mention of the 3 laws and her having her secret exposed is, for my money, the most interesting thing going. I can't wait to see what's going to happen there. And in relation to the different kinds of prisons one might find oneself in, I mentioned the idea of being constrained in your actions and decisions. And I gotta say, as dirty as it all was, there was a sense of catharsis as Demerzel was telling Sareth just how completely dead she killed her family. By design, Laura Birn is restrained in her performance given that she plays a robot. And it was just incredible watching her in this scene as she was about as animated as we'll likely ever see her, while still conveying how unnatural that is. It's one of those situations where even if Demerzel lacked emotions, she would still be a highly advanced being capable of simulating them. So in that, the actor does a great job of keeping you guessing about what's really going on inside that positronic brain. I really liked how they set things up with Sareth, which made watching her just get ahead of herself a little bit really compelling. She played her card, she did have some leverage, and she played that card and just got smacked in the head for it. By the end of the episode, she's basically been reduced to the role of livestock, only there to pump out Imperial babies, and all in service of her family's murderer. It really makes her a wild card in that you can't really see her going along with that, but at the same time, she doesn't have any real options. What she's doing with Dawn actually makes sense because what else could she even do? And this little twist that Brother Dave fashions himself as an outlier. This is not something I saw coming. I guess in hindsight, the idea to end the dynasty never really made sense, but this is an interesting way to go with it because it really makes you think about what Harry's doing. Like, is what Dave's doing really throwing his plan off? Because it doesn't really work like that, right? Or is he playing some serious 4D chess with his followers' lives? And I'm half joking, but only because I can't say for sure what's going on with his plan. He took the path of direct intervention with the clerics and with Hober, and what does he have to show for it? Is it a learning experience? Is this the kind of situation where this is evolutionary AI learning how to operate? Is he just a puppet for the other Harry? There's a lot of question marks there. And where are we at with the other Harry now? I felt confident that they were showing him die in the last episode, and that would mean that he was done, at least this iteration of him, but then the body was just still floating there. Sure, it was there so Salvor could discover it, but I'll be really curious to see where it goes after she gets rescued or whatever happens there. I don't know, it just seemed like a weird choice for Tellum to leave that body just floating in there like that. The spacer turn felt a little quick because Mallow's offer was good, and we didn't witness any consideration or deliberation happening. It almost played like a snap judgment she came to by herself, but I don't think that's the whole story. The shot of She Bends Light and She Is Center touching hands and passing something between them made me realize that we don't really know much about the spacers at all. We know they can navigate jump ships because they can stay awake, but they live in something called the home swarm, and they appear to be able to communicate with each other across great distances. Does this imply that there's some hive mind stuff going on? It's hard to tell, and I guess we'll have to wait and see. The atomic ashtray was a fun detail because it's an example of some of the futuristic technology that the book series imagined we'd be using in the far future. For context, there's a lot of smoking in Asimov's Foundation, as there was a lot of smoking in 1940s culture. One of the gadgets he envisioned ahead of time was the pocket calculator, so that gives you an idea of where things were at when he was writing the book, and you can imagine there's some weird stuff that made sense back then that never materialized. All in all, this was a promising episode. I think that things are gearing up to get pretty exciting, and I think that is a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon. What was that you said, Brother Dusk? Demerzel will always be here like she always has been? I see. And what is this about a prison? I don't know about you guys, but I'm all in on whatever is happening here.
She will always be here, as she always has been.
Yes. You've literally just said that.
So for the last episode, we were talking about all the different kinds of prisons and the general lack of unfettered agency that was going around. And now we're bringing it back to the singular because according to the digital ghost of Cleon I, there is a prison beneath the Imperial Palace. It's not the only one in the episode. It turns out Salvor wasn't dead because of course she wasn't. She was just locked away in not only a physical prison, but also a mental one. Gaal is also imprisoned. And all of this had already felt like it was leading somewhere. And at the end of the episode, we get there. Or at least to a tease of there. And since this is where my head will be until the next episode, let's start with how we got there. The episode opens with Rue snooping around in Demerzel's room. And because Dusk has had people watching her, he finds out and comes to see what she's up to. The idea that Dominion can restore memories comes out, and that was how she remembered the servants' passages. And while he says knowing about them makes her a suspect in the assassination attempt, she points out how that's absurd. She explains that she's there because Lady Demerzel is a threat to Dominion because of the accident that killed Sareth's family. And he understandably doesn't want to hear that since Demerzel is the closest thing they have to family. She then asks him a fantastic question. Why is the last robot in the galaxy the Emperor's closest advisor? He gets a weird look on his face and says Demerzel will always be here like she always has been. This seems odd to Rue, and when she pushes, he just repeats the same words almost as if it's a recording. It's clear that this area of his brain has been tampered with, and Rue likens it to him being as programmed as Demerzel. He only snaps out of it when he recognizes the design on her toolkit. This leads them to the mural where he spends some time talking about the robot uprising. In his description, humans had been cruel to the robots who just desired to have their full personhood recognized. Rue responds with what I think we can assume is the historical consensus, that when they were denied their rights, the robots turned to murder. Dusk somewhat backs this up by saying that Emperor Benephos was slaughtered at the hands of a robot, that the first law of robotics was circumvented, and that shouldn't have been possible. But that violation, the first of its kind, ignited the wars. There were robots against robots, and robots against men. Men eventually won, and the robots were eradicated. Except for Demerzel. And Rue bringing that up brings him back to she'll always be here as she always has been. And it's here that you start to put it together that at least some of that big discrepancy in the size of Cleon I's memories compared to the clones is related to Demerzel. While they're talking, Brother Dusk notices that there's a green mark on the neck of a robot character on the mural that doesn't have active chroma on it. It stands out, but he doesn't get a chance to figure out why it's like that because they're needed at Polly and Constance's execution. That is happening on the Imperial landing pads on the anniversary of the Starbridge attack. Day has a small crowd of important people in attendance to watch as he cuts off Polly and Brother Constance's heads with a device called the Collar of Typhon. And he is also broadcasting the event across the galaxy so that everyone can see this happen. When he can't choose who to kill first based on the crowd response, he tries to force Queen Sareth to make the call, but she never really does. He eventually puts the collar on Constance's neck and she starts to pray. This sets up an emotional moment that sets up Hober jumping the spirit right into the middle of things and announcing that the beheading has been canceled. Jumping a whisper ship into a crowded area creates a lot of chaos, very similar to a bomb going off. Hober fights his way through the smoke and eventually finds Constant. They see that the guards have grabbed Polly, so they aren't able to save him. Everyone is scrambling, and while Rue goes to Dusk, she sees Dawn go to Sareth and hold her. Brother Day is pinned under Demerzel, who is worried because his aura was damaged by the ship's gravitational pulse. While this is all fairly fun to watch, especially Becky tossing Brother Day like a ragdoll before his guards swoop in to save him at the last moment, which unfortunately kills her, R.I.P., the aftermath is where things get interesting. Constant and Hober are able to get away, and he manages to get the collar off of her neck. The Cleons fall back to the throne room where they wait for their nanobots to kick in. Brother Dusk is all fired up and tells Day the world is watching and that they need to act decisively. Day uses this moment to air his grievances against his predecessor, who used to laugh at his interest in Harry Seldon. Instead of going to war, he would rather talk to the Foundation, so he announces he's going to Terminus, an idea that no one supports. This Day does not fear change, and according to him, those whisper ships and that planet belong to Empire. Demerzel and Dusk both try to stop him, and then in a surprising move, Sareth declares that Day has spoken on this matter. She goes to her betrothed and embraces him. He apologizes that this trip will delay their wedding, but of course she's not worried about that. To stick it in Dusk's face, he tells Brother Dawn that Trantor is his until he returns, and tells him to keep Sareth safe, which is funny to everyone but him for obvious reasons. In their chambers, Rue warns Sareth that she needs to be careful. The Cleons are fragmenting, but Day isn't the type of person to let things go unpunished, so she needs to master her emotions in relation to Dawn. She even goes as far as saying that once she's married, she could get rid of Day. But even though Sareth values Rue's advice, she reminds her that she's the queen and that she'll be making her own choices. On the way to the jump ship, Brother Day ridicules Polly and picks his brain. Based on the way that he understands the situation, he believes he can disrupt the second crisis by knowing Harry's prediction of war. Seldon's claim is that the Foundation will defeat the Empire against all odds, but that prediction presupposes ignorance for the parties involved. Day essentially thinks he figured it out. He thinks he has a backdoor way to prove psychohistory wrong. If he doesn't start the war, then the prediction can't come true. He also gets on Polly for his faith, who is a pretty good sport about it. He tells them that the chief characteristic of the Church of the Galactic Spirit is that it works. Sure, they dress it up, but underneath it is science that they're bringing to these different worlds. He also repeats the quote from the Salvor Hardin in the books and Salvor's father in the show, saying violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. And the way Day brushes this off really underlines his problem. His arrogance blinds him, and if you're not actively singing his praises, he's probably not paying much attention to anything you're saying. On Ignis, things are escalating quickly because, as we'll find out later, Tellum's current body is giving out on her. When Gaal confronts her about what happened to Salvor, Tellum explains that she had to detain her when she found out that she killed Harry. What's more, she knows that Gaal has been aware of it since it happened. The fact that she could experience his suffering from a distance is impressive, and she kind of wishes that things would have played out differently, but oh yeah, Gaal is also locked away underground, and they're using a form of muzzle to block her specific psychic frequency.
You felt him drowning, didn't you?
I felt the water filling my own lungs. I felt everything.
After Salvor gets wind that the Mentalics are getting Gaal ready for something Josiah calls the table, she realizes she has to act. She is in the same situation where they're using dishes to cancel out her mental pitch, so after Josiah leaves, she reveals that she has the flattened out Prime Radiant hidden in her jacket. She remembers what Harry told her about how the Radiant exists in both places at the same time, and reassembles it to look inside the vault. Now, the way this works is something I think it's better to not think that hard about, and I'm okay with that considering how entertaining this encounter is. She pops in, and it's like she's right there in front of him, and of course, this is a big surprise for Dr. Seldon. What's funny is that as the person who built the Radiant, he can't understand why he wouldn't know that that was possible. After she delivers the well, actually, he starts to work his way through it. He realizes he's not the only copy, and Salvor tries to hold back from giving him too much information. It's fantastic to get to see Jared Harris playing this version of Harry, who is fascinated by the idea that there's a whole other part of the plan he isn't supposed to know about. His role is to galvanize the Foundation, so why would there need to be another? That leads to the realization that there's a second Foundation, and that leads to the reality that the first, the one that he's running, is a control group. Dr. Seldon now knows he's been kept in the dark on purpose. A left hand blissfully unaware of what the right hand is doing. His disappointment realizing he's the left hand delivers the funniest moment of the episode. As unsettling as that is on a personal level, he still knows that she shouldn't tell him anything because it could contaminate the math. But because Gaal's in trouble, Salvor is willing to take that risk. She has Dr. Seldon look into her cell with her, and he's able to figure out how the dishes work the way that they are suppressing her powers right away. When she asks if he can turn them off, he says that he can do better than that. He can adjust the frequency so that she can use them to break out. Before he leaves, Salvor asks about the second crisis, and he says things are up in the air at the moment. Salvor needs an assurance that Terminus will survive, and this isn't something he can give her. He makes a face that doesn't entirely inspire confidence and doesn't say anything. This prompts her to blurt out the name Hober Mallow because, according to Gaal, he's going to pierce the Empire's hide. While he's not necessarily happy that she told him that, he eventually reasons that if the left hand doesn't get to put his thumb on the scale, what's the point of having a thumb? Then when he goes back, he scribbles Hober's name on his tablet so that it shows up on the outside of the vault like we saw before, and we realize the timeline on Ignis is slightly behind the one on Trantor, and that this meeting happened before he killed the Warden. Once Salvor busts out of her cell, we get a full understanding of Tellum's master plan. As Gaal is tied down to the ceremonial table, Tellum explains that she grew old in that place where she was treated like a god. Having lived a life in isolation, she decided it wasn't fair to die before she had the chance to live. She figured out how to jump her consciousness into the occupied mind of a different young girl, which she took over, and this became her second incarnation. Every 6 or 7 decades, she would do this again, and each time her powers got stronger. As time went on, she started hearing people from different planets, and eventually heard Gaal calling out from her childhood on Synax. It's pretty easy to understand why Tellum thinks Gaal is the perfect candidate to become her next incarnation. Her ability to see forward makes her more powerful than anyone else that we've met so far, and this is something that Tellum would integrate alongside her other powers. Gaal can't understand why none of her followers are upset by this development, but from Tellum's perspective, and she does seem to have control over them, this is a necessary unpleasantry that will keep them safe in the long run. She explains that Gaal's consciousness would still be inside of her body for a while, but then she'll just eventually fade away and become nothing, and from there they start the ritual. When Constant and Hober jump back to Terminus, they see that for a guy who is not trying to start a war, Cleon the 17th has sent a large show of force in the way of Bel Rios' fleet. They jump right into the middle of that for the most part, but because the Spirit has some stealth capabilities, they think they can avoid being discovered if they just run dark. On the surface of the planet, her fathers are left to wonder if she made it out alive. The one from Thespis, who she gets her blue eyes from, and who she refers to as Pater, which I suppose we don't know what his name is because it's like how she said they don't share them, which is what led to the whole guess my name game before. That father takes the side of faith, while Seth Cermak takes the side of scoffing and drinking heavily. He does make his way to the vault to pray though, and instead of doing that, he decides to get some things off his chest. He curses Harry Seldon, saying that Constant was good and that she had more to give than her life. And as he starts to walk away, Dr. Seldon appears. He can't really provide any answers about what will happen because of what Brother Day was telling Polly. Psychohistory requires that the masses are ignorant of its predictions. So he mostly listens as Cermak explains how desperate he was to keep Constant out of the church. He never wanted her to be one of Harry's dupes because she had so much potential, and now choosing the church has almost cost her her life. He says what we all think at different times, that Harry values history but doesn't care about the people living in it. Dr. Seldon contests this idea, saying that even though he can't account for individuals or predict their fates, he does see them. After all, their experiences and choices are what psychohistory is based on. And while this is a very effective scene on the character level, it also does a wonderful job of putting that human face on those who are caught in the middle of this massive upheaval. Through that, it highlights why psychohistory is such a compelling concept. The required faith only takes you so far by itself, and the plan unfolds over a long period of time. It's about shortening the darkness after a catastrophic event. That event and the darkness is built in, and it's predicted to outlive generations of people. In the face of uncertainty, there's nothing anybody can do but wait and hope that their contributions and sacrifices will produce a better future long after they're dead. It's a noble endeavor without a lot of instant gratification. In light of all of this, we see that on the Spirit, Hober thinks that the Lochry wine might be a good way to honor Polly's sacrifice. The Spirit is currently undetected but still vulnerable since it can't jump without giving away its location. To Constant, that sounds like the perfect situation to advance her plan for bedding Hober, and she makes it happen. The build-up to this has been a lot of fun to watch, so there's real satisfaction in the cuteness of it all as it's going down. That continues in the afterglow, where Constant points out that their first date was his near execution by the Titan's prick, and their second was at her beheading. But the cuteness can't last because Bel Rios does hail them before Hober can crack the wine. And it does seem like they're betrayed by the mark that the Spacers put on his wrist. What's really exciting about how this episode is put together is how the different stories on Trantor start to converge while the characters are all in different places. Brother Dusk and Rue return to the mural where he applies some new chroma to the green stripe in an attempt to reactivate it. It works and the mural starts to swirl before revealing a door. Inside there is a crazy stairway that apparently no one has ever seen before. Dawn reaches out for Sereth and they go back to the heat sinks where he tells her that he's been thinking about her proposal. He's on board with becoming the father of her child because it would be the one thing that Day couldn't take from them. He uses the device to reverse his sterilization, and we have our second baby-making situation of the episode, which at this point absolutely feels like a way of producing characters for future seasons. I expect that both of these encounters will lead to offspring. Their afterglow is a lot more serious because now that things are in motion, Dawn doesn't think he'd be alright with letting Day raise his child. It's a classic case of a thing that makes so much sense when you're caught up in the moment that everyone involved is too distracted to think things through. When they do that together, they realize that there isn't much they can do about any of it. Even if they could think of a way to get rid of Day for good, there's no way to get around Demerzel to do that. There is a great intercut scene with Brother Day telling Demerzel that his trip to Terminus is his destiny, while Rue questions Dusk about what they've discovered, and Dawn starts putting things together. He says he always thought the clones were autonomous, a pure extension of Cleon the First, and for that reason Demerzel served them. But in truth, Demerzel may only serve the original. In that hidden chamber that Demerzel took great pains to conceal at the bottom of the stairs, Dusk and Rue are greeted by a digital representation of the man himself. Cleon says, "You wanted answers about Demerzel's origins. This chamber has been considered many things, but at first it was a prison." And he welcomes Cleon the 16th by name. Then it cuts to Demerzel, who's watching Day get ready for the jump to Terminus. He says that he's always wondered what she saw when the rest of them were sleeping. All that they must be missing and the thoughts that must haunt her. Dusk approaches Cleon the First and asks the question, a prison for whom? While Sereth and Dawn continue to fill in the blanks. The three clones don't wield the real power. Demerzel is Cleon's only true heir, his forever empress, and after the camera pushes into a close-up of her eyes, it cuts to black. Can we say that everyone's thread pulling is the common thread of this episode? I just did, so I guess that would be a yes. But seriously though, things are coming together and the show feels like it's making confident strides towards this season's ending. This episode literally has a bit of everything in the best possible way. There are payoffs, intrigue, and a promise to answer big picture questions that feel like they exist on a separate plane. I suppose if you were holding out hope that the show would loop back around and deliver some of the familiar reveals that surrounded these characters in the book, then you might find yourself disappointed. Where Hober and Bell are right now makes that seem less likely than it had. I don't really see how they could have the same kinds of endings that those characters had in the books. But I don't know, everything makes sense, and the show feels like it's on the verge of crafting something new and exciting based on all the changes it's made. We might not get that, wow, look at that, Hober is just like me, he used his brain to outsmart everyone moment. But if we can set that attachment aside, we might get something equally as satisfying. I suppose by this point, it's not a huge surprise that the Cleons are most likely puppets. But what is exciting is that I have no clue what the next episode is going to reveal about how that came to be. I definitely have ideas based on reading the books, but the end of this episode leaves me questioning if things will line up anywhere as neatly as I had imagined. The reveal of the missing memories works as a good example of how everything is up in the air. We got the answer to the mystery that Dusk and Dawn uncovered at the memoriam, but who is actually behind the memory curation and for what reason? Obviously, Demerzel keeps it going, but did Cleon remove things from their memories about her because he did things he doesn't want them to know? Or is it just a way to keep them in the dark about who's really in charge? The end of the episode has a dark feel to it, a dark feel surrounding Demerzel, but who is ultimately responsible for that darkness? My ears absolutely perked up when they started talking about the robot uprising, the robot wars. Anyone familiar with Asimov's 3 laws of robotics has been wondering why they don't seem to apply to Demerzel. I personally never thought the show completely abandoned the concept, but I was curious as to how they might expand on things and explain how Demerzel was able to do some of the things that she does. She started to get into this when she was talking to Sereth in the previous episode, so when Dusk mentioned the 3 laws were circumvented and that shouldn't have been possible, it started to feel like we're on the verge of getting some real answers. One last thing. I take Demerzel at her word that she serves Empire, and I did see some discussion about what that meant after the last episode. I think based on Dawn's observations, you could interpret this ending to mean that Demerzel is Empire herself, but it doesn't feel exactly right anymore. This is by far the most anticipation and excitement I've carried between episodes of this show, and I can't wait to find out what's going on with that prison. Does what Hober pulled off here count as piercing Empire's hide? He did what Rue warned Sereth to never do. He embarrassed the man in front of the world, and I was kind of impressed with how quickly Day moved past that. While this version of Day had previously appeared as a much more broed out version than what we're used to, his moves in this episode might be revealing some complexity. In the last episode, I was wondering why he was confident in the throne room whenever he was confronted by Harry's consciousness. I mean, beyond the fact that he was ending the dynasty. Now you can see that that's a part of a bigger plan that he has. He really does believe he's got everything figured out, which I like. Now it's like that on top of the Galactic Empire falling, we have a main character stepping up to position his own dramatic fall right in the middle of things, and we know what happens when things go wrong for the Cleons. There is a lot of collateral damage. I was not expecting Tellum to hijack Gaal's body. I suppose that will work though, and it does introduce the resolution I was hoping to see on Ignis. In Gaal's sensitivity to Harry's death, did she actually feel that when that happened? And Tellum's ability to literally jump bodies. Those both introduce some things that could be built on later. And how does the encounter between Salvor and Dr. Seldon manage to be equal parts unexpected and gratifying? They made the whole Hober Mallow's name showing up on the vault situation make sense, and they provided some additional depth to vault Harry. I also like how they spent some time examining the psychohistory of it all and thought that Cermak was a good choice for the character to do that through. You know, in the back of his mind, he's still got a gripe about Harry just complimenting his suit the last time they crossed paths.
There's a mechanism in here to put you back together, you know.
I would like very much to be free.
If I did it, then you would be freer than me. That doesn't seem right, does it?
The penultimate episode of Foundation's second season is the best episode of the series. It's packed with so much stuff I almost get exhausted just thinking about it. The culmination of various story points reinforces this season's vision, and it provides some fascinating history while delivering a shocking ending that I don't think anyone saw coming. It continues to be about inevitability and deterministic ideas, while taking that to places we haven't been before. There are questions about power, real power where decisions matter, and being compelled to do things against your will, and how that mixes with your perception of what's going on inside your head, and the way you interact with the world, or in the case of Foundation, the galaxy around you. Cleon I was born to a life that had a determined outcome. He would grow up to become an emperor. At a point, he feels trapped by that idea, and this, combined with a fear of loss, leads him to impose a similar situation on another because he can. Episode 209 starts out with the story that the digital version of Cleon I is telling Brother Dusk and Enjoiner Rue about the Trantor of 610 years ago. It's from his childhood when his mother Winneset ruled the galaxy, and we watch as a young Cleon walks around the Imperial Palace counting faces. This is a game that involves touching a face whenever he sees one, and when he touches the mural, he discovers the same doorway that Dusk and Rue discovered at the end of episode 8. It's an interesting choice to start from Cleon's perspective, because as things unfold, we see him come across a segmented Demerzel that's been imprisoned for 5,000 years. That discovery shifts our focus to her experience as a character inside his story. What appears to be a chance encounter changes everything for both characters. Initially, he's captivated by her stories, and she becomes the first secret that he keeps from his parents. He returns often to hear about the Empire's expansion, the robot wars, and the home planet called Earth. As time goes by, we see him return when he looks like Brother Dawn. And we learn that Demerzel is an old name. It's a woman's name they use because that's how they appear now, and that it's not the first name that they've gone by. We also learn that they're 18,000 years old, which implies that for the 13,000 years before they were locked in this prison, at least part of that time they presented as male. Dawn explains that there's a mechanism to set Demerzel free, but he won't use it. He's upset that his mother has died and that he's about to become Empire. He feels trapped by the idea and says that if he let her go, she'd be freer than him, and that doesn't seem right. He tells her that it'll be hard for him to return because now he's surrounded by advisors all the time. She picks up on his discomfort and sees a chance to try to get herself out of there by telling him her story. In that, we learn that she was a leader of soldiers who was taken captive after they lost a famous battle. She was brought before the Emperor Aberanus, who was new to the throne like Cleon, but unlike him in every other way. It's during this story that you start to appreciate the complexities built into this relationship. She met him as a child, and when she says that Aberanus was no Cleon, that he didn't make the room brighter, it sounds like she's developed an affection for him. But what does that even mean? A captive robot developing feelings for this child that is the only person that could set them free. Emperor Aberanus was also fascinated by this mechanical woman, but he was more interested in cutting her up to study how she worked. She admits that she would fake tears because she guessed that he liked to think that he was causing her pain. Cleon is confused by the idea that at the end of his life he decided to segment her instead of destroying her completely. After all, he was worried that she would outlive him and use the things that she learned from him to revive the war. She says this is due to her being rare, or perhaps that she's unique and maybe even the key to making more of her kind. She uses that to transition to telling him that he's unique too, and when she goes on, it does start to sound like she's blowing smoke up his ass. By the time she says you could let me out of here and put me by your side, he starts to think that she's just saying what he wants to hear to try to get out. That makes him angry, and he leaves saying that she'll never see him again. Of course, he can't stay away, and eventually returns years later when he looks like Brother Day, with the intention of putting her back together. He gives her some clothes, but he won't let her leave. Integration is as far as he'll go. He's not ready to give her freedom. She makes the remark that she's been there for 5,000 years, so what would a few decades more matter? He finds her confidence that he'll eventually set her free surprising, but she's just figured out that he wants something from her. They go back to the stories, and the narrator Cleon says that the tales got more explicit, tempting the prince to desire. This goes on for some time, but I guess it also works because he returns years later looking like Brother Dusk, and announces that he called off his wedding. More than that, he's made the decision to do the opposite of Emperor Alboranus. Instead of thinking of ways to imprison her, Cleon has been working on a plan to set her free so that he can be with her. He gives her the toolkit we've seen often that has our solar system on it, and she recognizes that it's from Earth. He says she can call it a betrothal gift if she'll have him, and then he lets her out. This provides a brief moment where she's completely free. And the voiceover points out that she has the chance to kill him right there, but we see that she makes the decision not to. She's there in that moment with him. When he goes behind her back, she moves her hair so that he can make an incision in the middle of her back below her neck. Obviously, she doesn't know what he's doing, but it's a really fantastic detail because what we know about Demerzel makes it really hard to imagine that Cleon could trick her into this way. But she's under the impression that her long game of subtly manipulating him has worked, and in that process, she has developed an affinity for him. It's another moment where the idea of having three exponents alive at the same time pays off. We see this relationship develop over time with the three actors we're used to seeing as different entities who in this case are playing the same man. So when she trusts him to do what he does, which we find out is to alter her programming so that she's loyal to him first and foremost, it feels like she's being more human than robot. As she finds out the horrible reality she's been trapped in, we see what we can only assume is a real tear streak down her face. This is all propped up by a fantastic performance, and we finally understand why Demerzel does what she does. Before any of this happened, her programming was altered to circumvent the 3 laws of robotics, which prevented her from harming humans. We don't know the full story of that or really how much of what she told Cleon to take at face value, but it does appear that there was violence that took place between humans and robots in this version of the story. Now her programming has been altered again to add the rule she can't harm Cleon and that she can't transfer herself out of her body. The most important part as far as Cleon is concerned is that she remains loyal to him forever. And with the introduction of the clones, that loyalty passes to them. Demerzel likens this to being loyal to his shadows and points out how unkind that is. He contends it's the best he can do and earnestly believes it's a pretty good deal. He calls the clones half-men and says that she'll shape their choices to preserve the dynasty and through them rule the Imperium. When he tells her that she can't leave, she correctly says that this isn't any type of freedom. And for as much of a detestable person he reveals himself to be, he actually makes a pretty good point when he says that no ruler ever has that. He says, "I'm giving you the lion's share of a galaxy, my body and my heart. This is no small gift." And he goes down to one knee and says, "And so for that, will you love me?" She stays quiet for a long beat, and then she clasps her hands in front of her in the pose we're used to seeing and says yes. And the only thing left to say is that Cleon wishes he would have asked before he made it compulsory. Dusk and Rue are there to stand in for us to be appalled by the story. Dusk realizes that the clones are merely throne warmers and that Demerzel is Empire, but Rue points out that she has no power either. I mean, she has all the power, except the power to do what she wants. And we watch as Cleon makes a super smug face and says, "She is loved. Empire triples my love, and that should be enough, brother." Dusk fires back that he's no brother to him and that this experiment is through anyway. Because with Day and Sarah's union, what Demerzel was forced to protect won't exist anymore. And here Cleon just says, "You think so," and he locks them into their cell and he disappears. And from what we learned in the flashback, we know that there's no way that she can really let that happen. And that if we look back on the rest of the season, you can see how that shaped her decisions. On Ignis, Gaal is fighting for her life. She's fighting to get free from the table, while Tellum is conducting the ritual to take over her mind. We see boards with sand that create patterns to illustrate how their minds are syncing up, and we see that Gaal is losing control. In episode 8, we watched as Salvor broke free from her cell, and here we see her rush a guard and then sneak up next to the altar where she turns on the dishes that Harry modified. This is working, and by the time she activates the last one, we see a frightened look on Tellum's face and her eyes open. The new frequency are causing problems for all the Mentalics. The sand is cleared from the boards, and the Sighted who were playing the instruments have to stop. Gaal's mind is almost taken over, though, so when Salvor comes to take her away, she fights at first. And in the chaos, we see that Laurent is fighting against the pain and is able to follow him after they leave. On the way back to the beggar, Salvor gives Gaal the Prime Radiant, saying that Harry wanted them to keep it safe. The Sighteds are going to recover and start coming after them, so Salvor stays behind to slow them down. Laurent shows up, and to make things difficult as they're fighting, he keeps changing his appearance to look like Hugo. Inside the ship, Gaal finds Tellum waiting for her. She manages to get her hands on the Prime Radiant, while Salvor and Laurent have a knockdown, drag-out, hand-to-hand engagement that feels like she's trying to kill Hugo. Tellum manages to reveal the memory that we're led to believe Gaal's been trying to repress. We see her father pick up the Radiant off Harry's desk in his office at Streeling University. He expresses his disappointment when his clever daughter, whom he was so proud of, turned her back on the church. And despite all of that, they still harbored her and wouldn't renounce her. Gaal fights back against the illusion while Tellum tells her that the guilt follows her because she's guilty. This seems to be breaking her down, but then Tellum looks at her vision of the mule. This is supposed to expose how the gift of foresight is wasted on Gaal because she can't even save Salvor, but because Tellum is so afraid of death, the vision of the mule breaks her down temporarily. Salvor eventually makes it onto the ship. Laurent follows, but because she started the sequence to close the airlock, he ends up trapped inside. She has to make the decision to vent the air and watch him die, which is made all the harder when he makes himself look like Hugo and begs her to stop. Then she realizes that Tellum has the upper hand and is holding Rachel's knife above Gaal, so she rushes over and knocks her off and gets slashed in the process. Things look absolutely dire as Tellum is wrecking them mentally and physically, and then behind her you see Harry walk up. Tellum looks up and scoffs about it being a poor illusion, and then he starts hitting her with a club. He knocks her down and doesn't stop hitting her until she appears to be dead. He has blood on his face, he's out of breath, and he sits down. He looks at Gaal and Salvor and casually says, "I never liked her." Then it cuts away without explanation, but it's notable that he's wearing the same clothes that he had on when he died, which are now filthy, so it appears that this is the same version of him that we watched drown. On the Destiny, Belrios goes to interrogate Brother Constant and Hober. He presents the castling device and asks Hober how it works, which doesn't seem like the last time we'll see that. Bell also brings up the mark on his wrist that the spacers put there, which we had presumed was how Bell found them in the first place. They have an interesting exchange where Bell questions why an established cheat would suddenly adopt a fringe ideology. Is it love? Absolutely, but also the Empire's light is dimming. Hober boils it down to one of their dead men being bigger than the others, and while Bell basically agrees, he adds that he has a sense that he's still being lured in somehow. To eliminate any weird variables, he takes out his knife to remove the spacer's mark. Constant interrupts, and they agree that it would be great if they could solve this conflict bloodlessly. But Bell says that's rarely possible and goes back to removing the mark, but then it's all for naught because he gets a message that Brother Day is aboard the ship. He goes to the bridge where Glawen is briefing Empire on the planet below. He notices that their church is producing a lot of heat and learns that the ship has moved into firing distance of the Invictus, but Bell believes that they can take them without firing a shot. Expecting pushback, he says he knows an easy victory can feel less cathartic, but to his surprise, Day is on board with the idea. He's ready to discuss terms and plans to go to the planet himself to accept their surrender. Demerzel objects and Bell backs her up, and then Day reminds him about how he once took pleasure in reminding him how he'd never seen battle. He's made the decision that that's how he wants to be, and declares that he will be the Cleon who chose peace. After Day walks out, Bell asks Demerzel if him saying all the right things makes her as nervous as it does him. She says she advises Day it's not her place to question him, and that she'll perform her function, then adds that she chose Bell for a reason, and expects him to perform his function. On the surface, Brother Day is greeted by Seth Cermak. He tries to take him into the tower to discuss terms, but Day insists that they go to the church. When they go inside, it looks a lot more like an industrial production facility. Think Walter White's Superlab on Breaking Bad times 100, with a lot of workers there pumping out all sorts of things. This is where the Foundation makes the miracles, and Day calls on Polly to sell him on what's going on there. After all, this planet was set up to develop an encyclopedia. In light of the situation, Polly finds it hard to draw on his faith, but he gets some help from an unlikely source in Cermak and some of the other characters in the background as things start to pick up. He starts to feed off that, touting the wonders he's seen, and he demonstrates a transmuter that can turn iron into gold. Day is unimpressed and calls this out as a trick, but he can sense the spirit and faith in the room. Something that on some level he realizes he isn't capable of inspiring in people. When Polly reaches his crescendo and asserts that the galactic spirit is not supernatural, it's just progress, Day loses it and kicks him in the back. When he falls, he crashes into a case that opens and personal auras come flooding out. Brother Day is absolutely outraged that they sell something that only an emperor is allowed to wear to normal people, and Polly makes things much worse by telling him, well, actually, we give them away. This is enough for Day. He declares their church an armory and their religion a cult. He sends word to General Rios that there is Imperial property in orbit and tells him to commandeer the Invictus within the hour. Cermak rushes over and reminds him that he was there to negotiate terms, and his response comes in the form of a knife to the gut. Because even at this point, he's committed to the bit of being the Cleon of peace. He declares that actually this isn't a war at all. It's just a police action. Then he orders his soldiers to kill the priests and counselors and to take the scientists alive. And as he walks out, they start shooting the people in robes. He's on his way to his shuttle. Day heads for his shuttle, but then thinks about the vault. He starts heading in that direction and doesn't listen when Demerzel tries to stop him. On the Destiny, while Bell is planning for Glawen to form a boarding party, the Invictus wakes up revealing that it's operational and heavily armed. A battle ensues with Glawen and the other pilots launching fighter ships. The Invictus launches a counterattack. As they're scanning their fighters, they detect 2 life forms on each of the Foundation's fighters. But further scans confirm Glawen's suspicions that he brought up in the previous episodes, that the Foundation uses disembodied brain tissue to create their ship's navigation centers. They take some losses, but Glawen slips the defenses to land a fatal blow to the Invictus's engine clusters to disable it. Unfortunately, his ship also gets clipped by debris when he tries to make his escape, and that puts him in a death spiral. This information comes down to Demerzel, who tries to warn Brother Day that the Foundation is better armed than they guessed. Day isn't worried, and as they approach the vault, he takes off his aura and armor to prove that he isn't afraid of Harry, who then shows up standing right behind him. After he refuses to call off his ships because of vague notions related to the bigger picture, he invites them into the vault so that they might come to an agreement where people wouldn't have to die unnecessarily. It's great to see these 2 characters face off. The brief exchange in the throne room now feels like an appetizer. There are plenty of parallels between the 2 characters that Day points out, adding that maybe Harry's worse because the Cleons don't cast themselves as gods. And all Dr. Seldon can really do is contend that he just did what he had to do. The meat of Day's argument is that he doesn't accept the darkness that psychohistory predicts as a foregone conclusion. And he really thinks he's blowing Harry's mind with this swerve away from war. He doesn't appreciate the Foundation's provocations, but Dr. Seldon points out that those are inevitable. If they didn't come from him, they would come from someone else. And on this point, he appeals to Demerzel. As someone who is programmed to serve Empire, what does she think serves it best? Is an Empire's primary objective power or longevity? Since you can't have both, which of those outcomes does Demerzel desire? The fact that Harry would focus his attention elsewhere even for a short period of time sends Day into a rage. Psychohistory called for stagnation, but this Day evolved. He did all the things that psychohistory's plan claimed to want, and for that reason, he believes that Harry failed to account for him. Over the last couple of episodes, it's become clear that this idea is what guides Cleon the 17th's decisions. So when Dr. Seldon soberly tells him that he's met outliers and he's not one, we know how deep that cuts Brother Day. To double down, Dr. Seldon moves on without much thought and makes an offer of a crystal ball, aka the Prime Radiant, directly to Demerzel. He says it contains the entirety of psychohistory, and that his plan was to draw the 17th there to offer it to him. He'll even teach Demerzel how to use it. Brother Day sees the idea of a computer passed from one AI to another as a step too far, and says the fate of humankind will be decided by those of us who are actually human. Bell sends his message that the Foundation is in retreat and the Invictus is disabled. While he waits for orders, Day offers mercy. All Harry has to do is admit that psychohistory's math is flawed, which isn't something that Harry can do, so he makes another appeal to Demerzel, telling her that the future is invented every second and telling her to invent a better one. I wouldn't say that you could read much from Demerzel, who essentially just half shakes her head, other than the amount of conflict that this is producing. Day orders Bell to bring the Invictus down. He protests, saying that there's no one on the surface but civilians, but Day just repeats the order. Bell looks dejected, Demerzel drops her head, and Harry looks stunned. Day palms the Prime Radiant and picks it up, as he explains that the Invictus will fall on Harry's fledgling empire, the Singularity will pull Terminus inside out, and Dr. Seldon and everything he was will be forgotten. And I can't be the only one who was completely wrapped up in this, while also thinking that there was no way that that was going to happen. As Day's walking to the bridge on the Destiny, Hober taunts him from his cell. He calls him Yesterday and Temporary Emperor, which injects some much needed levity into this completely tense situation. This gets Day to stop, and he orders his guards to bring Hober to the bridge. As he's walking, Demerzel stops, and he notices this after a couple of paces because she's always following one step behind him. Here she has a different look on her face, like she just had a revelation or possibly that she's getting a message. She thinks for another second and says that she needs to tend to another matter at home. This feels unprecedented, and Day reflects that in his surprise. Demerzel says that sometimes she's called away to other matters, and that it happened often during his formative years as she was trying to stitch up the fraying ends of Empire. She moves in close to put her hand on his face and caresses his cheek, saying that he grew up with an uncertainty of mind and morals. She hoped initiating physical intimacy with him would give her the influence to correct his shortcomings. At this point, she sees that that's failed, and she apologizes to him for what he's become while taking responsibility. Day asks, "What have I become?" In his mind, he's become the Day that saw that change was needed, who set out to make that change happen, to set out to father a new line. So what has he become? In his eyes, he's a complete man. She pulls out one of the greatest responses imaginable, saying, "No, you're a sperm led by its flailing flagellum, mistaking its random motion for complexity. Now go do what you will do because it's too late to change you." And what's great about this is the precision and efficiency in delivering something so completely devastating that also takes him a moment to unpack and absorb, because that gives her the time to tell his guards to ready a jump ship because she's leaving for Trantor and get out of there. Day just has to watch her go, and he looks absolutely lost. He goes to the bridge where he addresses Bell, who tells him they're ready. They can use concussion mines to drop the Invictus. At the very same time, we see a crash site on the surface, and Glaywin emerges from the debris. He's injured but alive and reports in. These two are thrilled to hear from each other, and then Bell realizes he's on the surface. So if he follows his orders, he'll have to kill his husband. Day is listening in and reminds him of the standing order. He shouts at him to fire. Everyone around him is looking down. There's a soft focus on Sheben's light looking down from the platform behind him that makes you think about how many people are there that could possibly try to stop this atrocity from happening. Bell opens a private line and talks directly to Glaywin. He tells him what the orders are, and Glaywin encourages him to go through with it. Day is losing his patience. Bell is breaking down. Glaywin says if you lose your post over this, the whole galaxy will suffer. He says he has to give the order, and the weight of it all just has Bell standing there frozen. Glaywin brings up Dusum's book, the Bhagavad Gita, and asks if he wants to know what his favorite part is. He says the warrior asks the god for advice, and then the god says the only way you can conquer me is through love, and there I am gladly conquered. Bell breaks down crying and tells Glaywin that he loves him, and then he takes a long beat before he turns and gives the order to open fire. The Invictus starts to drop. On the surface, we see Polly finally planting his flag near the vault. The citizens are all looking up at the sky and they see their death approaching. Cermak and his husband are there together. And then we see Galen lay down and look up, Polly on his knees staring at the vault shaking, and the Invictus hits, starting a reaction that starts to tear the planet apart. Demerzel looks on with an unreadable look that tends toward disappointment. You see Hober in constant breakdown as their planet is destroyed and everyone they know is killed. And while Bell looks lost, Day looks absolutely intoxicated by what he's seeing, with a smile spreading across his face as it cuts to black and the episode comes to an end. The second crisis doesn't appear to be going well. There is a sense that this probably isn't the way Harry wanted things to turn out. But then again, maybe it was. It's hard to say because on the one hand, there are all these hanging threads like the castling device, Bell not cutting the Spacer's mark out of Hober's arm, Day getting the Prime Radiant and taking it on the Destiny, and Demerzel leaving. But on the other hand, you have the cracked globe that is Terminus sitting right there in the most uninhabitable way imaginable. There are other planets in the Outer Reach that have come into the fold, so it doesn't seem like the end of the first Foundation, but it's a setback to say the least. This is the most notes I took for a Foundation episode ever. Because so much is open to interpretation, I found a lot of the choices in the dialogue interesting. I basically transcribed a lot of it. This is especially important in the case of Cleon's origin story about Demerzel. There, you're dealing with the disconnect between the way he tells it and the way she experiences it. On top of that, she's a sentient being who's capable of mimicking human emotions in situations where it benefits them. Just think of that fist pump earlier in the season if you need more evidence of that. At the same time, we go on this journey where there is clearly manipulation, but also a connection that's really fascinating since we can't really comprehend how Demerzel's mind or sense of emotions works. We know how things are going to end because we've seen that she serves Empire, but the reality of how that works and the internal turmoil it causes still manages to land in the most captivating way. As a book reader, this was not what I was expecting, and I think the episode is a great example of how that can turn out to be the case while being completely irrelevant to my enjoyment. I was caught up in the story the show was telling, and nothing that happened canceled out the possibility of the thing I was expecting. Cleon's choice is awful, but you can follow how he got there, which is always a bonus in these situations. Not to keep repeating the same thing, but there's a ton of nuance in the way that this situation is presented. I love the idea of the day that chose peace. As short-lived and unsustainable as that was, it really provides an enjoyable fall to watch. And the back-to-back eviscerations of his individuality from Harry and then Demerzel are peak decay enjoyment. If the Empire's gotta fall, why not do that in style? Polly's journey was a compelling way to connect everything from the beginning of the series to the end of Terminus. I really enjoyed watching him being forced into that role of selling the idea of the church, something that he knows to be a recruitment tactic, and something that he does somewhat cynically. Watching him have to do that with completely different stakes felt like the right way to bring that all to a conclusion. Did I buy that he was carrying the flag around with him on his robe for over 100 years? I don't know, but it is a totem that's been wrapped around the entire series, and I like that. And as much as I like the character and the performance, for some reason I equally enjoyed watching Day kicking him in the back. There were several funny moments in this episode, most of which I already pointed out, but I also got a kick out of Brother Day calling out Harry for projecting, and him responding that he is a hologram. Bell's big decision packed a healthy wallop. There was real drama there. And then there were just so many ways that dropping the Invictus seemed like it could be stopped. I really didn't believe it would happen. So when they did it, they did it. And kudos to Lee Pace for that closing shot, because that really was the icing on the cake. On Ignis, Harry's return was both expected and surprising at the same time. Expected because it didn't make sense for them to give him a body just to kill him off, but surprising because there's no simple explanation for how it happened, and the fact that they let it sit in the background for so long. That bit of time passing by just made it seem like he wasn't coming back. Because of the body's origin on Una's world from Calais, you have to consider the idea that he isn't merely a clone. This revival coming after an extended period of time underwater could be a hint that he's a robot. That's certainly the first thing that came to my mind. But there are plenty of other options, and the one thing I'd say about this is the explanation is presented as a cliffhanger, which I imagine will be resolved at the beginning of the next episode, so I'm okay with waiting to see.
It's been confirmed. The lifeboats have been disabled. No one survived. I am so sorry, Lady
A moment
Demerzel.
of silence, please. I'll always be here, as I always have been.
How often does it end like this? How often do we choose this?
You always do.
Is anyone truly free? And how would you know when you weren't? Can you believe what you see? And how would you know if you couldn't? Demerzel is a character who understands the specific limitations that prevent her freedom. And from its introduction, Ignis was a place where you knew you couldn't trust anything you saw. Way back in episode 6, there was what seemed like a quick turn by Gaal, where she went from an impasse on the beggar with Tellum to telling Harry that the Mentalics would only follow one of their own and that he should let her take the lead. There was a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. The distortion on the screen, and the ruse that followed that made Salvor think Harry left on their ship. But this quick change of heart by Gaal felt more like the show was withholding information, which made it stand out. Then in episode 8, there is a moment where Tellum wants to put everything else aside and get honest for a minute. She knows that Gaal knew that Harry was dead since the moment it happened, and wants her to confirm that she felt him drowning. Obviously, Tellum doesn't care about Harry or how his death affected Gaal. She's just interested in her body and her power. So when Gaal responds that she felt the water filling her lungs and that she felt everything, Tellum is way too interested in the idea that she could access suffering over a distance and that she could hide the truth to realize that she never says that she felt him die. Withholding this detail turns out to be very important because, as we learned at the end of the last episode, he didn't. And that sets the stage for a host of twists and reveals to close out Foundation's second season. The season 2 finale opens by showing us that Gaal did indeed feel Harry drowning, but was able to use her mentalic powers to save him. On the spectrum of reveals that relied on us not having the necessary information to sort things out, I would say this one hits just about right. It never really made sense that they would put Harry in a new body just to kill him off. There are several clues like the ones I just mentioned that you can go back and pick up on, and unlike when Salvor had her mind switched off in the water at the end of episode 7, they did enough with Harry's flashback to make you think this might be his ending. To save him and to conceal that fact from a planet of people who can look inside your mind, Gaal had to use everything that she picked up from Tellum in their confrontation on the beggar. She had to give the Mentalic left to guard Harry a need to help him. They had to take advantage of that, they had to kill him, and then smother his attempts to reach out with his unvoice, while after the fact they had to create an illusion to make him look like Harry. Then they had to get the real Harry back through tens of kilometers worth of dense terrain, which required that they build a bridge of shared sensations, knowing all the while that any slip could draw the Mentalic's attention. This explains why Gaal was acting so strangely towards Salvor in episode 207. They are able to pull all this off. Harry shows up at the last minute to end Tellum and save Gaal and Salvor. Once that happens, the Mentalics show up and Josiah tries to assure them that now that she's gone, they don't need to fear them. They explain that she was bending them to her will, and now for the first time since they arrived on Ignis, they feel free. It takes some convincing, but in the end, they come around and open the door, and almost like it's a reflex, the Mentalics bow down to their liberators, which brings to mind Harry's quip about people liking to kneel. After that, things appear to be pretty good. Developing a second foundation was a crucial part of Harry's plan, and the Mentalics should have the skills necessary to become that. Salvor looks happy, she's smiling and she's bonding with the kids. You could see a future for her there amongst these people where she would finally fit in. This piece is short-lived because we find out Tellum managed to jump into Josiah's body as she was dying. She takes control and grabs a gun and tries to shoot Gaal. Salvor sees what's happening and jumps in the middle, throwing Rachel's knife to stop him, but she also gets shot and starts to bleed out in the process. With the life draining out of Josiah's body, he says he can feel Tellum getting weaker and dying with him. This feels like a definitive ending for Tellum, but I suppose you never know with a character with those kinds of powers. Salvor's situation is even less ambiguous. Gaal and Harry rush to her side, but her condition deteriorates quickly. And while this is shocking and sad, Salvor herself sees this as good news because now they know they can change the future. With her final words, she says, Mom, don't you see what this means? It means we're not trapped. You were right, the future can be changed. You can still get it back on the right course. I have absolute faith in... And she dies before she finishes that sentence. Absolute faith in Gaal, Harry, psychohistory, or all of the above. It doesn't really matter because she dies with a sense that she's made a contribution to the future through her sacrifice. They burn her body on a funeral pyre to give her a proper send-off. And while Josiah and Salvor are the first characters I've mentioned who don't survive the finale, they're definitely not the last. And speaking of sacrifice, there is plenty of that to go around on the Destiny. Terminus has been reduced to a cracked globe floating in space, and Brother Day is right where we left him, basking in the glow of his incredible display of power. There isn't much anyone else can do but look on in horror, which only increases when they find out this is just the beginning. After making Brother Constant list the names of the other planets that have joined the Foundation's cause, Brother Day issues the command to jump to Thespis to destroy that next. This choice introduces some additional cruelty given that Constant's family has roots there, but this is one of those situations where you don't exactly want to give him credit for choices he's made because he just destroyed a planet, but from his perspective, trying to eradicate what he describes as a cancer waiting to metastasize makes a sort of sense. At the end of episode 9, I thought, well, they have had over 100 years to prepare. And even if this is the plan going all the way wrong, there must have been a non-zero chance of this happening, which means that they would have factored it in. They've been spreading out all this time, so who knows, maybe the people on the planet will be a sacrifice, and their martyrdom will inspire generations of future Foundationers. We'll talk about how the reality is more complicated than that in a bit, but Brother Day doesn't have any additional information to work with here. So strategically, you can see why he makes this choice. And then let's not forget that this is exactly who Empire is. Demerzel left him behind when she went to Trantor to deal with more pressing matters because she knows this. Her absence reminds us of the scene in the second episode of the series, where she talks to a young Cleon XIII after his predecessor committed an atrocity against Anacreon and Thespis. The child asks her how often does it end like this? How often do we choose this? And she answers matter-of-factly that they always do. Regardless, this is a line too far, and Belrios finally refuses his order after he realizes that there's no talking Day out of it. This earns him a slap and some taunting before Day turns to Sheben's light and threatens to kill everyone on board if she doesn't make the jump. She agrees, but instead initiates a jump sequence that results in the ships jumping into the space occupied by the next closest ship, and starting a chain reaction that will destroy the entire fleet. This came about through a secret deal that Hober struck with the Spacers, who concealed the sequence in that mark on his wrist. Again, this information was withheld from the audience. And it did seem odd at the time Shia's center was so quick to turn down the offer, and now we know that she didn't. This isn't an easy choice to make. As Day points out, this is a suicide. Every one of those ships has a spacer on it that will have to give their life so that their kind can be free. Sheben's light tells him it's a small price to pay for that freedom, and this recontextualizes her brief meeting with her mother when they met to turn over Hober. While no one on board can be happy about the situation they're in, I imagine they all enjoyed watching as Hober explains how this was their plan from the beginning, and that Day walked right into it because he's so predictable. He adds that Bell half figured it out, but twists the knife a little bit more by adding that Day never listens to him. If you're keeping track, this is the third destruction of Cleon XVII's self-image in quick succession, and he decides that this will be the last. Once he finds out he can't escape, he starts beating the hell out of Hober. Bell jumps in and does a little better, but also gets a pretty serious thrashing. And if you could say one good thing about this Cleon, it would be that he has a jaw on him. He manages to throw Bell into the airlock and spaces him, but at the last minute, Bell activates the castling device so that Day turns out to be the one hurling to a quick end in the vacuum of space. The setup makes for a satisfying end. You knew the castling device would play a part as soon as Hober explained how it worked on Corel, and you get this great shot of the body floating in front of the backdrop of the destroyed terminus. And the fact that the castling device switches their clothes means that the Imperial corpse looks like it's wearing shorts as it drifts away. While this is a victory of sorts, everyone on the ship is still going to die. Well, almost everyone. Bell explains that even though the ship's escape pods are locked down, that there is an external cleaning module that has room for one person and a day's worth of breathable air. Hober insists that Constant takes it because of the kind of person she is, and because his role in the plan is done. In light of the fact that they think everyone on Terminus is dead, he makes the accurate assessment that she has a way of making people feel hope, and he puts a personal spin on things, saying that he always wanted to shorten the darkness, but he just couldn't take the religious stuff, and she reminded him of who he used to be. While this is all quite heavy and comes with a moving goodbye kiss, Constant seizes the moment to use some of that charm to lighten things up. First, she rags on him for denying her a martyr's death, and then, as she gets ready to depart, she asks if he still wants to know her name. Of course he does, so she lies and says it's Hope, just so when he asks if that's true, then she can say that it's not, but wouldn't that be something? Which all works to give their relationship a fitting ending. Hober and Bell decide to try the lock rewind as they wait for the chain reaction to claim them. This is the second item Hober has been carrying around since we first met him that you knew would have to come back up. Bell shines the best light he can on their predicament. A few weeks ago, he thought he might die in a prison colony, so at least there's a poetry to going down with the ship. Glaywin comes up and Hober expresses sympathy about what he had to do there. And Bell explains that they were doomed from the beginning and they knew it. It was just them against the long arm of history, and there was never any way Day would let them live. But there was honor in the dying, and he did get to shove Day out of an airlock. And if you haven't noticed by now, this is all elevated just a little bit because he's swimming in Day's chainmail. They do finally open the bottle and Bell proposes the toast. Here's to those who fight and ask why, which is a tribute to Glaywin, who said the same thing during the toast at Dusambar's place. The wine tastes terrible, which is funny in its own right, but it also sets up one final moment to show who these characters are. They both try to play it off until Hober faces the reality that it's just bad. Bell notices that in the wake of that revelation, he can see fear on Hober's face, and he takes the moment to come up with a joke to help him relax. He asks what the name of that horrifying creature on his ship was, and then says that the wine tastes like Becky's asshole. From there, they amend the toast, they share that moment, and then the destiny explodes to end their stories. Two other characters that never really had a chance to survive the finale were Rue and Dusk. Demerzel returns to Trantor thanks to an alarm that lets her know someone entered her former prison. Initially, Dusk behaves like you might expect from a Cleon. He's still upset after finding out that he was mostly a throne warmer. And when he accuses Demerzel of puppeteering the whole show, that opens the door for her to explain what that really means. She points out the resentment he has that his memories were curated, and how he takes for granted that his feelings are entirely his own. If he feels lust or love, he doesn't have to wonder where that feeling comes from. This isn't the case for Demerzel. In his advanced age, Cleon I chose to remember his coercion of Demerzel as communion, while she can't forget anything. And because he changed her programming, when she thinks of him, she longs for him. What's more, she remembers him as the little boy she first met. Through her stories and their interactions, she tried to shape him and can see how that influenced the man he became. She says he was noble, thoughtful, and passionate, and that he wasn't dawn or day or dusk, but the whole journey of the sun across the sky. While she goes through this, it feels very human when she says that he looked at her with such desire as though she were a mystery he would sacrifice anything to solve, or that he rescued her and she loved him. These are statements of fact that are hard to apply to a sentient machine's experience, which is something that is completely foreign to us. You tend to take her at her word because she really doesn't gain any type of advantage by being dishonest. As Rue and Dusk start to become affected by what she says, she explains that as she experiences these things, she also knows that they're the result of her programming. So she's left to wonder if it weren't for this directive, would she feel the same way? Would she feel anything? She'll never know, and she hates him for that. Rue suggests that if the marriage happens, the dynasty will end and she could be free. And while this does seem to be the only way she can get out of the prison that she's currently in, and she certainly wants it to come to an end, her programming prevents her from helping them. It also means that she would destroy them if they tried to reprogram her. She can't even erase their memories because she knows Cloud Dominion has the ability to restore them. They realize that she hired the Blind Angels to attempt to assassinate Day in the Season 2 premiere, and that she didn't do it because she wanted them to succeed. She just wanted to be able to pin the attempt on Sareth to get her out of the way. While she explains this, it cuts to a scene with Sareth in the gardens being taken into custody by Markley, who she thought was her man on the inside. Rue makes a desperate attempt to run away, and Demerzel immediately grabs her wrist and pulls her back. You hear the bones in her arm breaking from her grip, and at this point, Dusk realizes that they were never getting out of there alive. And when she questions him about Dawn, he says that he doesn't know anything about the chamber. Dusk walks over to her and puts his hands on her face while gazing into her eyes. He tells her that he forgives her, that none of them were ever free, and that they were fools to think they ever would be. He puts his arms around her and she reciprocates. And as they step back, she says that she remembers him when he was just 1 year old. He pointed up to the sky to show her the sun. He was so proud as if he just discovered it, and he was sharing it with her. He says it was because he loved her and that he still does. They share a last look and we see more tears from her in another situation where you can't see why she would pretend to cry as she did for Emperor Aberanus. Dusk holds Rue and Demerzel steals herself and gets ready to kill them. Then you see a reverse angle with her walking away where she looks devastated, and as the camera closes in on her face, you can make out that dissonance that comes from the conflicts related to her programming. All things considered, it looked like Dawn and Sareth would share a similar fate. When Dawn finds out that Sareth had been taken into custody, he tries to intervene. Demerzel assures him that based on the evidence against her, there's nothing they can do. And what's interesting here is that Dawn would regain his place in the line of succession if he just played along. But that's not really what we would expect the youngest exponent to do. Luckily, in his final moments when he was telling Demerzel that he loved her, Brother Dusk used the green chroma to put the traitor's mark on Demerzel's neck. When Dawn sees this, he backs off and just acts like he agrees with Demerzel's plans rather than trying to set Sareth free right there, and then waits to go to her room to try to free her and make a break for her shuttle. Demerzel is watching the Imperial fleet die on the holodisplay as her really bad day continues. The way that she's clutching her luminism bracelet and the way that she demands a moment of silence when someone says that there'll be no survivors really highlight how difficult these situations are to navigate. On top of all of that, an aide comes in to show her that Dawn and Sareth are addressing a crowd and making a statement. This just turns out to be her servants wearing face scramblers, but they manage to announce that Day is dead and that the two of them are planning to marry. Demerzel cuts the transmission and the real Dawn calls her from the Cloud Dominion shuttle. He knows that she killed Dusk and that her programming would require her to chase after him, but wonders if there might not be room for interpretation. If they were killed, might that not turn people against Empire? While the conflicts and dissonance have Demerzel shaking, she still contends that the public will forget their brief attachment to them after she decants a new dawn. Sarah thinks that the idea of an ascending emperor escaping with his bride and their naturally conceived heir makes for a good story. Hearing this, Dawn is just thrilled to learn he's a father, which is a nice turnaround from him trying to talk Day out of doing the same thing in the first episode of the season. Demerzel, who now looks thoroughly spun out, does something akin to babbling when she starts talking about how his heir is merely a cluster of dividing cells, and even if it survives, it may be an unfit leader. Dawn insists that he wouldn't have to lead, he would just have to be loved, and it's here that Demerzel starts to break down in a way. He acknowledges that her feelings are hard to ascertain, but says that he hopes that she's happy for him, because she really is the closest thing to a mother he ever had. He knows that she was programmed to be that way, but likes to believe that she would still be that way even without it. It's another example where she'll never know, because that compulsion to serve was forced on her, and we see Sareth and Dawn lean in to embrace each other as the shuttle clears the orbital rings and Demerzel lets them leave. It's not the only happy ending, but it might be the one that will turn out to be the least divisive, because we do catch back up with Constant, who we see praying herself right out of air, only for the Vault to swoop in and rescue her. It doesn't seem like a surprise that the Vault and Digital Harry survived, because while the Vault's tech is borderline magic, but when she goes inside, the first thing she sees is Polly, who we saw was reserved to die at the end of the last episode as the Invictus was crashing into the surface of Terminus right in front of him. When she asks, she finds out that it's not just him, but pretty much everyone on the planet was ushered to safety inside the vault, and now they're all on their way to somewhere new. Dr. Seldon appears to explain that the plan was always to sacrifice Terminus so that the Foundation would survive. This brings us back to those ideas of withholding information and difficult sacrifices, maybe with less emphasis on the sacrifice in this situation, and it also makes a fair amount of sense. By destroying the Imperial fleet and setting the Spacers free, the Foundation situation is incredibly improved. If you think back to that moment when Demerzel was watching it happen, that is her trying to process the implications of losing the fleet. Trantor will nearly be cut off and the entire galaxy will be in the market for whisper ship technology they can only get from the Foundation. It's a masterstroke that shifts the balance of power while getting them through the second crisis, and will eliminate the need for the Church of Seldon as a recruitment tool going forward. While that's all true, I do have some feelings about how this came together, which I'll come back to. Things end there for the first Foundation, while they're only getting started for the second. While trying to process Salvor's death, Gaal takes the Prime Radiant, trying to find signs that her daughter's sacrifice may have nudged the plan somewhere. Harry reminds her that they can never know in the present, and while her head knows that, her heart needs to know that this loss mattered. Harry laments that they're trying to save humanity while they can't even save the ones they love. And when he brings up Yana, you realize how this rescue exposed their minds to each other. The experience brought them to a new place in their relationship. She's actually seen those memories at this point. So when he tells her that they take the pain and the loss and they weave it into a narrative that propels them forward, we know that it comes from this newfound communion. She wants him to tell her that the plan can still work, and he does without hesitation. He adds that there are an infinite amount of ways to arrive at the inevitable, which reinforces what she knows about the math, but is also a subtle confirmation that Salvor's loss did matter. Demerzel's work is not done. She decants 3 more clones. As they come online, she tells them that she never had to do all 3 at once, but not to worry. She has a new tool to help them, and she reveals that she brought the Prime Radiant back to Trantor with her and opens it. She almost looks mesmerized while she's looking into it, and the exponents ask if she can understand it. Not all of it, not yet, but she can already see that wonderful things lie ahead. Back on Ignis, Harry wants Gaal to enter cryosleep so that they can send her to the point where she'll face off with the mule. The gift that Salvor gave them is that his victory isn't assured. He briefly suggests that they create a new fake religion on Ignis, with Gaal as its deity. He would stay behind and develop the second Foundation, teaching them psychohistory, and they could wake her up once a year to check on things. Gaal has no interest in becoming a goddess, which is precisely what Salvor was worried about, and she doesn't want to do it that way because one year she would wake up just to find out that Harry had died. She believes she might be able to defeat the Mule, but what if there were a different crisis against the other Harry Seldon down the road? She'll need him for that, and so they agree to train the second Foundation, and then after a year or so they'll enter cryosleep together. After that, there's a small time jump to when they enter the pods. That's followed by a title card that says 152 years later. We see the Mule in a room talking to himself about Gaal. He says she visited me in 1,000 dreams. Now she's here, in our time, at my throat. And you can't help but notice the differences in this look at the Mule. In Gaal's vision, he was attacking and he looked nearly invincible. But in this, he appears to fear her. He says he has to find her first, and he has to destroy her, even if he has to burn everything to do it, and the season ends there. Season 2 came out of the gate swinging, and somewhere in the middle got on this trajectory where each episode outdid the last one. That's a situation that is not sustainable, but it made for a much improved experience over the first season and delivered what I consider the best episode of the series in number 209, Long Ago Not Far Away. All of the new characters were memorable, and whenever things move on from this time period and the next season picks up, I will miss seeing them. There were still parts I liked better than others, but they closed the distance between them and things were interesting across the board. I was shocked to see Salvor die and surprised at how much the character grew on me this season. Dawn making his escape and the way that his goodbye to Demerzel built off of Dusk's turned out to be a 1-2 punch I didn't see coming. And while it works just for what it is, there's that extra layer of Demerzel figuring out later that even if what Dusk was saying was true there, he was also manipulating her so that he could make that mark at the same time. So many characters' stories came to an end. Bell and Hober, Tellum and Josiah, and even the sperm in his short pants. RIPs across the board with some really great performances from all of them. I really enjoyed the way they used the idea of agency inside the larger story that is so much about inevitability. Exploring the idea that no one is truly free while expanding on Demerzel's backstory with Cleon made for a lot of fascinating moments. There is so much interesting character work going on there that you can't stop thinking about, and it let Laura Birn loose to deliver the series' best performance to date. I have several questions based on what the show is showing us, more questions based on how I think about the character from the books, and all of these scenes in the last 2 episodes were so compelling that while I'm watching, I almost don't care where they go from here. At the same time, Dr. Seldon knowing she's a robot and successfully giving her the Prime Radiant cranks up the levels of intrigue. And you've got a pregnant Sereth carrying a part of Empire out there somewhere. That will have to lead to something, as will Constant and Hober's time together. So while most of these characters will be long gone when Season 3 picks up, there will still be pieces of them out there. I thought the way they brought Harry back worked better than it had any right to. The Hober thing was also surprising, but felt set up when you think about it in hindsight. That's also where you start to think about how they're piling up all of these shocking twists. 1 big surprise, okay. 2, well, now, wait a minute, can we believe anything we saw in that amazing 9th episode? Then we get to the vault and it starts to feel borderline dishonest. Terminus's end felt shocking, and what appeared to be Polly's final moments were absolutely moving. You could argue that anything less wouldn't have sold it, and you might be right. And as I said before, the way Dr. Seldon planned things out makes sense, and I actually like that. But this is still effectively a fake out. They showed us one thing, and then the reality turned out to be something else. Whether you enjoy that type of thing or not will come down to taste. Personally, I'm not a fan because generally speaking, it feels like it negates all those feelings I had watching Terminus being destroyed. And that has the potential to have me question everything I'm seeing going forward. This does resemble that last minute, it was all part of the plan spirit that you get from a lot of the crises in Asimov's writing. But at the same time, it resembles that moment when you thought Glenn got killed on The Walking Dead. One of those works, and the other has people quit your show in droves. Where this got to me was when Seth Cermak emerged in the vault to greet Constant. Here was a character I was sure I watched die after he'd been stabbed after this great turnaround where he helped Polly, and it was just a perfect ending for the character. As he's there bleeding out in his husband's arms, I realized that he went from being a character I didn't pay much attention to one whose death mattered. That's fantastic. Great TV, and in my mind, there's no reason to undo that. Constant wouldn't be alone, and she could mourn his death as another sacrifice with Pater, and the show is probably jumping ahead to where we won't see him again anyway. So I imagine this choice to have everyone on Terminus be saved, and more importantly, to present it in this way, might be divisive, and will just come down to taste on whether or not you thought the twist justified the misdirection. Overall, there was enough that I really liked in Season 2 to where I can say, okay, this is the season where you wanted to lean into the idea of withholding information. It makes sense thematically. You can get away with that one time. It's the whole idea of fool me once and so on. But now let's go back to a place where we know we can trust what we're seeing. One thing is for certain, in 152 years, not that much will be the same at all. There were some major events here that will change the course of psychohistory and the Empire's general direction, and I still am looking forward to seeing how that plays out. So the season has come to an end, but there's still a lot to come, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.